Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grimflayer. Hope you're all doing very well today, and I bet you didn't know that Chris Rock, comedian Chris Rock, is a fan of the channel. I bet you didn't know that. Well, now you do. Now you do. We've got a donation league today, provided to us by a supporter named Chris. No last name given, no last name needed, and since it's a donation league funded by Chris, and since we're playing The Rock, I can only conclude that it's Chris Rock, right? You know, I can only conclude. That's the only thing that makes sense, right? So, thank you, Chris Rock. Thank you so much for this donation league, my friend. Now, Chris is, he's on a list. He's been testing for a while. This is it. You're looking at it right here. And he says that it is very similar to and inspired by mine. So, obviously, I like where this has started off already, but Chris does have 4 significant changes to it that we'll briefly touch on here before we play our league with it. Now, Chris is prepping for a big event at the end of August, so to everybody out there watching, I'm sure he would love your feedback on the list as well as the feedback that I'm going to give. We're going to do a brief deck tech at the beginning. We're also going to do a wrap-up at the end talking about, you know, the various slots that differ from mine, as well as looking at the list holistically. So, you know, we have a 23 land count, just like I am currently on, but there is one change to the land base, and here we have Chris playing a Twilight Mire, where I play Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth. Now, this is definitely a flex slot in the mana base. It could be a lot of other things. It could be a 4th Swamp. It could be a 5th fetch land, perhaps. It could, you know, some people like to get a little greedier with the mana production and play a 4th colorless utility land, like a Field of Ruin or a Blast Zone. Some people like to get greedy with the life and play a 3rd Nurturing Peatland. So Twilight Mire is more similar to Urborg than any of the other options in that it is mana fixing. You know, it doesn't provide utility in any way except mana production, and it's very good at enhancing the mana production of the mana base. However, I'll be honest, straight up, I don't like Twilight Mire in place of Urborg, and I will tell you why. So we really want to be able to cast all of these lovely black spells, well, not on Earth, but all of the other lovely black spells on turn 1, and Urborg does that while Twilight Mire does not. Twilight Mire, of course, requiring another colored source of some kind to start producing colored mana on its own. Now, so Urborg provides that advantage of being able to turn 1 discard or turn 1 fatal push, and Urborg also provides the advantage of turning colorless or green sources into black sources. Now, is all that enough to play the Urborg before Modern Horizons? Maybe, you know, I thought about it, I tried it once or twice, it was not a staple in my list, but now the adaptation of Nurturing Peatland as yet another land that benefits from Urborg in that it's able to be tapped for black mana painlessly with an Urborg on the field. All of those things considered, all of those things rolled together, I really do like the Urborg. Now, Twilight Mire, of course, lacks the ability to produce black all on its own. So if you have a 2-lander that would otherwise be a keep with a Twilight Mire and a Field of Ruin, you gotta throw it back, and that feels really bad. Twilight Mire also, of course, does do some other things, and it is not strictly worse than any other option because this is a filter land, and if you have another colored source of any kind, Twilight Mire gets you anything you need. It gets you that double black for Liliana the Veil on turn 3. It gets you the green-black for Abrupt Decay or Assassin's Trophy if you don't have that, and it filters your mana heavily into green, making Scavenging Ooze even better. So let's be clear that Twilight Mire is a viable land, and is not strictly worse than any alternative. However, I do think the downsides do outweigh the upsides relative to Urborg in context of the land base, including Nurturing Peatland. I think Peatland puts Urborg over the top as, like, the best in slot, you know, flex mana fixer, basically, for the deck. I also, one final thing I'll say about Twilight Mire is I think it actually gets better the higher your land count goes because you're less likely to encounter the aforementioned non-bow with like a Field of Ruin Twilight Mire opening hand, and of course we are kind of on the minimum land count of 23 for this archetype, so I personally am not the biggest fan of Twilight Mire, but we are going to see how it goes, and again, I'm sure Chris and myself will both appreciate feedback from you out there. How do you like Twilight Mire? How does it stock up to Urborg? So that's the first change. The second change, relative to my list that Chris has made, is playing a second copy of Unearth. Now, I told him when we were communicating about the list that I liked this. I like this a lot. In theory, I want to see how it plays out, but Unearth is a really powerful card. It's one of the only tempo-positive things we can do. We are a deck that is almost depressingly fair at times in this crazy modern format, so the ability to spend 1 mana to get, like a 3-drop like Tireless Tracker back, and then start making land drops and activating clues when we otherwise might not be able to, or just simply having a double spell turn. Unearth has a lot of power, and it's got a really high floor, because it can always be cycled even if it's dead or suboptimal. Now, I have been down to 1 because the floor of cycling for just 1 copy is never that low. But the floor for cycling 2 copies in a game, that starts to kind of, you're spinning your wheels too much, you're time-walking yourself too much, having to spend your turn cycling dead cards. So that's why I've pared down to 1, but I am eager to see how 2 Unearth plays out. I do like that this is a direction Chris is attempting to explore a little bit more heavily in this deck. Moving on, we only have 3 copies of our favorite Liliana. Liliana the Veil, only 3 copies. Now, a month ago I would have said, I cannot condone this blasphemy, play the full 4, and I still play the full 4, and I do still like it, but it's hard to deny that Hogaak is here to stay in all its various iterations, and there are lots of other decks in the format that just go wide enough to make Liliana not the very best. I do like to see I would like to see another value-oriented permanent in her place if you are paring down to only 3 Liliana, and Chris is doing exactly that. We've got Vraska Golgari Queen main deck, so I can't say anything against this. I have been pleasantly surprised by just how useful Vraska has been for me ever since I adopted her once again as a one-of in the 75. I've been playing her in the side. Chris has got her in the main. Honestly, it's a little bit difficult for me to exactly say where she's optimal. I think that depends on the rest of your 75, but for the purposes of the overall list, I like her in the main just fine. Finally, we have Kalidas, Trader of Get. So this is a card that has been in my deck for a long, long time, but Postmodern Horizons has not been there. I will say that I am more optimistic about Kalidas' position now that Bridge from Below has been banned, because the Hogaak decks are now more liable to be overcome by fair interaction and fair hate, like Scavenging Ooze and indeed like Kalidas Trader of Get. So I will say that I definitely don't mind seeing the Kalidas. I never have, but especially now that Bridge has banned, I think Kalidas is a little bit in a better position. There's a lot of red deck win-style decks, everything from Burn to Mono-Red Prowess to Mono-Red Phoenix. They're still out there in full force, so Kalidas is fine. I will say, I think it's a little bit of a minor lack of synergy to have double Unearth in a deck that's also playing Kalidas. Again, it's a minor thing, but again, remember that Unearth does whiff on Kalidas. Can't buy him back. So if we are trying to maximize the power of Unearth by playing 2 copies, might we be better off omitting Kalidas? Alternatively, if we are trying to maximize the power of Kalidas, do we need to be on 2 Unearth? A very minor thing, but that's the stage we're at with this deck. We're making minor tweaks. So that's what's different relative to what I'm doing. Worth noting, since I mentioned Skoos, Chris is only on 2 Skoos. I think Skoos is really well positioned here. I recommend that everybody plays 3, with the minor caveat of we are on 2 Unearth with Chris, and most of the decks that Skoos is good against are decks that are going to kill a Skoos on sight. So the Unearth does technically function as copies of Skoos 3 and 4 if you find that Skoos in the first place. So it's not like we're totally omitting a Skoos here. I would argue against this if it was 2 Skoos and 0 to 1 Unearth. But because we're on 2 Unearth, that goes some way toward making up for the loss of the Skoos. But I still do like 3, but we'll see how that goes. The final thing about this list is that Chris has said he is also looking to put a second Collector Oof into the deck, but that might be more for local play. He's got some local meta to tweak, and for your local deck, whatever. Your local store or whatever, do what you gotta do. Playing the second Oof is obviously fine, even in a blind meta, but we're going to see if we miss the second Oof for the purposes of the big event, for the purposes of the online meta here, and we'll see how the list treats us. So thank you so much, Chris. We also, before we begin, need to thank our Patreon supporters, as always, and first and foremost among them is Chris, who was a confidant for a few months, donated a direct amount to make up the gap to hit that $50 donation threshold, and then over the course of our conversations, Chris has upgraded his level support, and he's now a member of the tier list here. So what more can you say? We really, let's give it up in the comments section, if you would, for Chris, please, for the very generous support for making this all possible here. And we also have a brand new Inquisitor, Dan Moulton. Dan is an Inquisitor who has just joined the ranks of Patreon, so thank you so much, Dan. Thanks as always to all Patreon supporters, and my friends, if you are enjoying this content, the link is in the description below. Feel free to visit and check it out and join us on there. There are over 60 Patreon supporters, and I appreciate each and every one of you. One final shout out before we begin our league, my friends. That is to mtgrock.com. This is a great little website. I was speaking the other day to Justin of mtgrock.com. He reached out to me and I said, you know what, man? I should give your website a shout out. I really should. Before I even committed to buying into BGX, it was Absent actually that I began with. I did see mtgrock.com come up a couple times on Reddit, and reading this website, seeing the high-level discussion, seeing just how much goes into making a BGX list great, as we saw with our deck tech at the beginning, just how much these little decisions can matter, really is part of what sold me on this deck and this archetype that we all know and love. So shout out to Justin at mtgrock.com. Great article that you're looking at right here. Go check it out, and without further ado, let's play a Modern League. Okay, my friends, round one, game one of this donation league for Chris Rock, and this is in replay form because that was Chris's request. Remember that all donation leagues, whether replay or live recorded, that decision is up to the supporter. So this will be a replay. Chris said he really likes the amount of detail we can go into for really kind of corner case situations or really tough decisions in replay form, so that's what we're doing. We had to throw back that one lander. The curve was too high to justify the risky keep, and here we are with a Malta 6 that looks respectable for sure, and we go ahead and bottom that Overgrown Tomb because it is the least necessary of these four lands. Blooming Marsh is painless, Forest lets us play around Blood Moon, Verdant Catacombs lets us get more basics if we want to, or go get that tomb we put back in the deck. So I think in this situation that is the correct land to bin, and we're starting off on the back foot, mulling to 6 on the draw against a Blood Crypt deck. Here I am worried about Jund or Faithless Looting, but we see Skirk Prospector, relatively new addition to the format. Sure, you got it. Back to us, and we kind of have just a super threat-heavy hand. So all we're going to do is run out that Hex Drinker. It's a Savannah Lions for the foreseeable future. We'll see if it can get us there. Opponent's got Field of Ruin into Mogg War Marshals, so it looks like Goblins to me, and opponent's immediately going to start cashing in some of the more expendable aspects of their board to cheat on mana, cheat out a Goblin War Chief. This is kind of a nice... apparently turn 2 play, even though it's a 3-drop for the deck, because it is going to start the clock, giving everything haste, including itself, and it is going to further accelerate their plays. So opponent doesn't want to trade away the War Chief. They're sending in the Prospector, and I actually chose to trade away the Hex Drinker because, again, it's a Savannah Lions for the foreseeable future. We do not lack for threats. We just want to, A, not get run over, and B, try to keep the board a little bit clear. They have effects like Skirk Prospector, that reward them for having a wide board, and also many other effects, including Munitions Expert, among other things. We draw Thoughtseize, awkwardly timed, thought about just running out the Goyf, but the opponent's already pretty low on cards after that turn 2 play, so I wagered it was better to run with the Thoughtseize, and we see another Mog War Marshal and a Sling Gang Lieutenant, which is kind of a curve-topping value play. Pretty easy take of the Lieutenant there. And then we'll run out our Catacombs so that we can go get a Tomb painlessly on the end step, and hope the opponent bricks for a little while. Opponent's going to field us. Fair enough. Starting to attack our mana base and fix their own mana as well, I assume. And here comes that Goblin War Marshal that we knew about. And we're going to get hit by a wide board for 4, but the opponent hasn't showed us anything else in terms of a payoff. Instead, we'll go get our Tomb. We have drawn Unearth, so that's actually a pretty reasonable draw at this point, even though Hex Drinker is kind of a low-value permanent in this situation. I really like just being mana efficient here, and presenting as much of a defensive board as humanly possible. Opponent's going to decline to pay the Echo cost. Mog War Marshal will bite the dust, making a Goblin token in its wake. And opponent will continue to aggressively field. And then just simply pass the turn. Interesting. So we draw Fatal Push. Definitely an interesting draw. Definitely good against a lot of the Goblin deck. But right now it's pretty awkward because it can only hit a token, right? So we're just going to instead spend the turn leveling up Hex Drinker. Look, I said it was likely to just be a Savannah Lions, and instead we're going all in on it. I rated that more highly than Dark Confidant here. The opponent did, however, have a Tarfire. So, nice answer to the Hex Drinker. They needed that. Notably, this sees play here, not just to grow our Goyf, although we thank them for that, but because they can tutor for it with Goblin Matron. It is a Goblin card. So, Hex Drinker gets got by the Tarfire, but our Goyf is gigantic, and we're just going to sit behind it until we can hit a 4th land for Vraska or hit more gas. Opponent dumps out the rest of the hand. It's a fetch land and another Goblin War Chief, so the board is wide, but they don't have any real payoffs at the moment. We draw Liliana of the Veil. So, Liliana, Edict You is not the worst. It's really not, but I judged it a little bit better to play the Dark Confidant here, hold up Fatal Push. You know, Bob does make their attacks a lot worse. Like, let's say they get some kind of Anthem effect. They decide to start trying to suicide, you know, past the Tarmogoyf. Well, Dark Confidant can at least trade off. We've also got a Fatal Push to blunt the efficacy of that strategy. But we'll see how it goes. Opponent will simply pass, no plays here. So end step, I did decide to just simply Fatal Push a token because, again, we want to keep the board clear. We want to be mana efficient since we have 2 high curve things in hand. Just got to use our mana, and if it just means popping a Goblin token, then so be it. We do draw the 4th land, but it's tapped, unfortunately. That said, Fatal Push is a nice draw, and we get to just Liliana Edict this turn and continue with our super defensive posture. So we're starting to take over the game here. And I also just don't want to get cheesed out of the game. You know, I don't want to take a bunch of massive Bob hits in a row and just get kind of burned out of the game and aggroed out of the game. I feel my position is strong enough now that I can start turning the Confidant sideways and either trade off or begin a clock of my own, and it's a trade-off, which is just fine with me. We are very, very ahead on resources right now, and we should top deck better on average than the Goblins. So, opponent will play out a Cavern of Souls and a Goblin Pile Driver. So, it's a good card, but not particularly scary. This is another payoff for them having a really wide board. It's why we just keep the board as clear as possible. Inquisition's a bad draw, but we do get to freely pitch it there to the Liliana. And then it is time for Vraska Golgari Queen. Just going to go ahead and take care of that Pile Driver and continue to be really patient sitting behind our Goyf. Opponent's flooding out. They hit the Auntie's Hovel, and we're just going to be super mana efficient here. We'll Fatal Push. We'll cash in our land. We'll draw another Fatal Push. We first take Liliana up before the draw so that we don't lose whatever we drew. And then we're free to fire up the Hissing Quagmire. We could leave it back against a haste threat, but we're just so far ahead. Like, if the opponent finds anything and they're priced into attacking our Planeswalkers, even with a haste threat, well, you know, they're just going to lose in a rapid fashion to the Tarmogoyf beats. So opponent rips a Goblin Matron. That's actually definitely one of their better top decks. It's a way to rebuild the board. So they go Matron, they get a Goblin Warchief, and they play the Warchief. And they've both got haste, but they don't feel able to attack with both. So again, even though this was pretty much the nightmare scenario of them top decking something perfect, it's still totally fine. I'm still fine that we attacked when tapped out with Quagmire last turn. So now we're going to Edict with Liliana. Definitely, if you're going to aggressively cash in your lands with Vraska, make sure you float them first. So we'll float black. And we drew a Verdant Catacombs, which is actually rather perfect. We're just living the absolute value dream here. So we go Tracker. Into Fetch Land, we Fatal Pushed away their Warchief. Vraska also provides a Revolt if you cash something in, so remember that. And yeah, we're just absolutely crushing the opponent here. It feels really good. Opponent takes their draw step, they'll scoop it up. So we mulligan to 6. We were on the draw against a really aggressive deck. They didn't have their best possible curve out or anything, but hey, they had turn 1 Prospector into turn 2 War Marshal plus Goblin Warchief. They went really wide really quickly. We traded off the Hex Drinker in order to kind of stem the tide, in order to slow their roll a little bit. And Tarmogoyf was a big old brick wall there. We had some good interaction along the way, and by the end of it, we were in total command. These are the board states you live for, my friends, as a Rock player. Feels so good. But Red-Black Goblins, Rakdos Goblins is a real deck, so, you know, let's not get too overconfident. Let's take a look at our sideboard, see what to do. Pretty simple and pretty powerful sideboarding in my view here, my friends. 4 copies of Plague Engineer, gotta be the first name on the team sheet. This guy just absolutely demolishes goblins. Collective Brutality, all 3 modes can be relevant. It's mainly another kill spell, but all 3 modes are relevant. Good card. Kalidas they're going to really struggle to beat Kalidas if we untap with him. And Liliana the Last Hope, again, just absolutely murdering X1s for fun. And in terms of what comes out, we're going to be on the draw for Game 2, so I would probably side something like this. All 3 copies of Thoughtseize can come out. We'll trim a Liliana the Veil. I like going down to 2, and remember, we only have 3 in the deck, and, you know, Bob is okay, but I think we can move pretty far away from him on the draw. On the play, I would be more inclined to probably shave another Inquisition, maybe even shave an Unearth and just get more proactive, you know, like leave in 3 Lilianas and 2 Bobs, or 2 and 3, something like that. But in any case, the sideboarding would look something like this for Game 2, and let's go check it out. On the draw here, my friends, and the hand is good, but the lands are extraordinarily painful on the whole. That said, it's a good thing that it's kind of a good thing that we have a land-heavy hand due to that. We should be able to mitigate the pain of that, and we've got, you know, 2 forms of removal and a Scooz, plus some redraws for Flood Insurance. It's a definite keep against this Goblin deck, so opponent will keep 7 as well, and they are indeed on Aether Vial, and we pick up our Twilight Mire. So I chose to run out the Overgrown Tomb tapped. Obviously, there's some incentive to wanting to hold up Fatal Push, but, I mean, I guess that's a strike against Twilight Mire. We could have played the Urborg if we were so inclined, if that was an Urborg, but in any case, they usually run out something more expendable early, so not holding up Push is not the end of the world, and yeah, it's a Mogwar Marshal. And, oh boy, there he is, there's the Plague Man. So our new objective is to just simply maneuver ourselves into a position where the Plague Man can blow them out. So for that reason, even though under normal circumstances I wouldn't want to just run out the Scooz without anything in the graveyard, without any open mana, we're definitely not doing that now. We just need to hold up Fatal Push here, and make sure we tag any Lords that they might have this turn if at all possible. Now, granted, we don't have a Revolt, so we'll see, but opponent will decline to pay the Echo. It's worth noting they also bluffed the Aether Vial activation, did not actually put anything in, and they didn't say anything in chat like, oh, misclick or whatever, so I think it was just a good old-fashioned bluff. But Vial's on 2, they've got land number 3, and it's Goblin Matron. Goblin Matron, very, very powerful card. And it's going to go tutor up another very powerful card, Goblin Ringleader. 2/2 with haste and ETB trigger that reveals the top 4 and puts all Goblin cards revealed this way. including stuff like Tarfire. So definitely a really nice one. And you can see where this deck has a lot of grinding power, right? So we're just going to get hit here. And, not going to push anything because the Plague Man is coming. The Plague Man's here. We drew Liliana the Veil, and that's all well and good, but it's time for the Plague Man. And this is not a Merfolk deck, so they don't have any 2-mana lords, so there goes their board. The Plague Man has decreed it. And they do manage to violence something that survives the Plague Engineer in the form of Pile Driver. So back to the opponent. Aether Vial's going to stay on 2. But there's no 4th land drop, so no Goblin Ringleader, and that's actually great for us, even if we only fade that for 1 turn. Now the opponent really has to draw the 4th land, and they didn't take the Vial up to 3 either, so it's not like they're going to get to Vial in the Ringleader anytime in the next couple turns. So definitely really, really nice for us. And, of course, most of their other plays are probably just totally hosed by the Plague Man. And would you look at that, we draw another one. Sometimes, my friends, sometimes life is just good to us. The second Plague Man is the clear play here, and we are definitely off to the races with a double Plague Man. Now I think almost everything in their deck, if not literally everything, is unable to stick on the board, so they need to find removal before they can do anything else. And even if they do, we've already, They will be 1-for-1ing us with a removal after we 3-for-0'd them or 1-for-0'd them with our Plague Men. So definitely great. We've still got a ton of gas in hand. And the opponent's now taking up the Vial, but a little bit late for that. So we're going to go ahead and pulse the Aether Vial. So why did I do that? So what I'm afraid of is that the opponent could find a piece of removal, whether it be a Tarfire or, Lightning Bolt, who knows what they have. Maybe they play Fatal Pushes and other things like that, too. They remove one or both of our Plague Engineers, and then they Vial in something that survives it on the end step. Then they untap. They have the Vial again. They have their mana. They just overload us. As long as we don't get overloaded on one crazy turn, we are not going to lose this game. Therefore, I don't mind the relatively low value of pulsing an Aether Vial, because I'm just trying to prevent a complete overload like 2 or 3 turns in the future, if that makes sense. So they're going to Vial in a Goblin Matron in response, who of course will die, but will tutor for a Tarfire. So pretty good play from the opponent. And they get to Tarfire away a Plague Man. So feels bad, but we're still shutting off a whole lot of their deck with this other one. And again, we're still more than winning the value wars as well. I'm going to play Blooming March there because Peatland is sufficient to hold up Fatal Push, and I'm not really inclined to crack a Peatland for more action on the end step, because we want all the green mana we can get for Skoos. Opponent will replay an Aether Vial and simply pass, and I think that's our cue to go on the Skoos plan, but let's attack first, see what they've got. And it's nothing, so sure, Plague Man beats continue. And we'll go get a forest, and then it is time for the Skoos to just go absolutely crazy. And I know that 8-Wek, the more all-in mono-red version of Goblins, plays Goblin Grenade. I don't know if the black-red versions tend to play Goblin Grenade, but I decided why not. We'll make ourselves a 6-6 main phase, get out of Goblin Grenade range. They would still need a lot. They'd need to Vial in, or play something that survives the Plague Man, and then sack it anyway to grenade the Skoos, but, I still think it's correct there to just play around it just in case. Opponent finally hits the 4th land, and see, here's the power of that Goblin Ringleader, It's a haste body for 4, only slightly worse body than Bloodbraid Elf, and we all know how good BBE is, that finds Munitions Expert, which is a fantastic card, a big reason this Goblins deck is competitive, and a 2-for-1 in the form of Mogg War Marshal, or maybe even a 3-for-1 if they can pay for Echo, and another Goblin Matron that tutors for whatever else they need, maybe another Ringleader. So you can see how this deck can be really, really effective in the long grind. But that's why we just keep the board clear as much as possible with the Plague Man. And, despite that really nice value they just accrued, they are still very, very far behind. We are continuing to flood out just a tad here, but we do have a good mana sink on the board, and we have gotten a lot of value, so much so that the opponent just scoops to our Liliana the Veil. And indeed we do have another couple critters to eat with the ooze this turn, so we could put the opponent all the way down to 1. They're simply not going to come back from this, it seems, and that is going to do it. So, what more can you say, guys? Plague Engineer, just play 4. Just play 4 somewhere near 75, in my opinion. Modern is in flux, and it's... I think our strategy is still quite well positioned, but at the same time, it is a little hard to cover all of your bases. And when in doubt, play your bombs. Like, instead of saying, is it enough if I hedge here and hedge there and hedge here and hedge there? If you're not sure, or if it's borderline, just play whatever cards are going to give you the most free wins. And I realize the irony of saying that on perhaps the strongest deck in the format without a free win mechanic, which is the Rock, but Plague Engineer is the closest thing we have to an I win button. It's the closest thing we have to an I win card, to an unfair card. In my view, I think we should all just be on 4 of these in our 75. 3 minimum, but more like 4. And in my previous video, somebody asked me, you side in all these Plague Engineers so often, why don't you just main deck them? Well, in the past I've played 1 main 3 side on this channel. I might even have played 2-2 on the channel before, I don't quite recall, but I'm working on that right now. I'm working on a revised build for my list that does incorporate some number of those Plague Men in the main deck. But in any case, whether you like the main side or split, this guy is our guy. This guy really does a lot of work in the format, and he just won us the game here. Pretty dominant display, if I do say so myself, against Black-Red Goblins. Feels good, my friends. We're 2-0. Well, 1-0 in the league, 2-0 in our games. Go on to round 2. Okay, we have won the die roll this time, my friends, and we've got a fine keep. Double discard on the play, 3 lands, Tarmogoyf, and a curve-topping Vraska. Can't ask for too much more than this, and I did choose to get Swamp because I think on average with another fetch land in hand, it could come back to bite us if we get too many basics and we're against like blue-white control or something, but I think on average the format punishes us more for unnecessarily fetching and shocking between the hyper-aggressive decks and the Blood Moon decks, right? So, blind get of a Swamp there because we're going to have 2 colors of each, 2 sources of each color either way, and we are against some kind of a Hogaak deck. Looks like Hogaak Vine. We're not seeing the Dredge tech necessarily. There's a lot of overlap these days, but Stick to Your Supplier, usually a sign that it's the Vengevine deck, and this hand is annoyingly resilient to discard. Stick to Your Supplier is arguably the very best enabler in the deck, even better than Faithless Looting in my opinion, and if there's only one of them, that would be the Snap Take. Now, because there's only 1 Neonate, there's 2 suppliers, do we take Neonate because it's the least redundant? You could, but they don't have anything that they need to get in the graveyard in the hand. They don't have a Vengevine, they have a Hogaak. Hogaak, because he's so incredibly balanced, can be cast from hand as well as from the graveyard. So even though you might be tempted to say Neonate is the take, I actually think it's just still another Stick to Your Supplier. Like, it sucks that they still have one after our turn 1 discard on the play, but they just kept a really good hand, basically. So there they go. Supplier is the play, but the opponent has whiffed. It is all lands and only lands in the graveyard. That said, again, Mr. Balance himself, Hogaak, doesn't necessarily care. In fact, would rather delve away dead cards, so we have to watch out for just the Hogaak plan. They're not getting other value from Vengevine or Gravecrawler yet, but Hogaak can still be cast turn 2, potentially here. The other reason it's good to take Supplier is because now they have to find another black creature as well, or green creature, in order to pull off the Hogaak cast. So for all of those reasons, I am, even though Tarmogoyf is really good here, a really good time to play Tarmogoyf and more mana efficient, I did feel obligated to Thoughtseize because we just need to take away potential black or green creature, basically, and we see the opponent has just hit another land, so might as well take away that Neonate. And now they need to find a black or green creature basically off the top of their library, because they have no graveyard mechanics yet, and they have nothing else in hand. So if we can just for 1 turn fade a black or green creature, we should be in the lead, and the opponent immediately rips a black creature. It is a Bloodghast, so bad beats for us, but what are you going to do? The deck is just that consistent. And wouldn't you know it, they have exactly enough to just cast the Hogaak on turn 2. So we're in trouble. We drew another Tarmogoyf, which is a fine card again in the matchup, but doesn't line up so well against Hogaak. Our hand's looking pretty poor, and we have no choice here but to just get smacked for 8 by the Hog. And, yeah. Opponent found another Insolent Neonate. Sure. Gonna run out the Catacombs, and we draw Blooming Marsh, so we are pretty much just dead here. There was maybe an argument for chumping last turn with a Tarmogoyf, actually, because we do have the Unearth, but that felt pretty bad. You know, we were really hoping to, like, draw an Assassin's Trophy and buy some time, but simply does not seem to be the case. So we would have been better equipped to survive this turn if we had chumped, but we can still block this way, you know, block the Bloodghast, block the Hogaak, and go to 1, and then they just get their Bloodghast back. So obviously we're dead with the Bloodghast and the Menace, and yeah. So we did draw a Maelstrom Pulse, that's an answer, but it's just a little too late. So I think we made the right decisions with our discard. In fact, I know we did. The Insolent Neonate was not a factor, but that's Hogaak for you. The opponent just drew another black creature off the top, a hard-cast Bloodghast, not the scariest thing in the world unless it is enabling the turn 2 Hogaak, and then it is a little bit terrifying. So, you know, we had a couple discard spells, a couple Tarmogoyfs, and oftentimes that will go a long way against Hogaak, but the deck is really good still. Unfortunately, that's just how it is, but that is alright. We are a deck that can tangle with them. Like I said in the deck tech, they are a little bit more susceptible to our quote-unquote fair types of hate. It's not Leyline or Bust like it was very nearly the case during the heyday of the deck with Bridge from Below. You know, stuff like Skooz, Kalitas, discard, Spellbomb, Surgical, it all goes a little bit, it all goes a longer way than it used to. So let's take a look at our sideboard, see what to do. Alright, my friends, so here is my view on sideboarding against Hogaak Vine. I'm more confident here now than I have been. You know, I've faced this deck a lot lately, a lot since the last time you saw me play on this channel. It's just been everywhere, so I'm pretty confident in some of this, but there's still a lot of nuance, so let me know what you think. But these 7 cards can all come out. Liliana the Veil's quite poor against all these variants. Tireless Tracker, just quite slow. And the Decay and the Decay on a Stick, respectively, in the form of Vraska, neither are great relative to Assassin's Trophy because, of course, Trophy can hit Hogaak and the others cannot. So we just don't need that limited removal. I would rather play some Fatal Pushes because they're just more mana efficient. You know, they work to stave off the early Hogaak. They can kill the Carrion Feeder, like Plan C attack, just going all in on a Carrion Feeder. And they don't use as much mana, so they're better alongside Skooz, right? So I think these are the worst 7 cards. And then we have 10 cards that we want to bring in, basically. So are we going to be able to bring in all 10 of these? Well, I think these 5 cards are the very best, just the 5 forms of direct Grave Hate, very, very good. And Plague Engineer also very, very nice. So that's a clean 7 for 7. Now, to get in 2 more Plague Men and 1 Collective Brutality, what do we do? So we're going to be on the play here for Game 2. I think that having Collective Brutality as a 2 of on the play is better than on the draw. So we'll say we're going to bring in a Collective Brutality and take out a Thoughtseize, which is more painful, and also hopefully less necessary on the play. And then maybe on the draw we flip that back, bring back the Thoughtseize, take out the Brutality if we can take him to Game 3. But we got to play all 4 Plague Men, in my view there. Just the more I play this matchup, the more I'm convinced that we do want all 4. So what do we do? On the play, you know, I think we can afford to be a little less reactive. We can trim away a Fatal Push. And then the last slot is actually up for discussion. You could go all the way down to 2 Fatal Pushes, especially on the play. Or we could cut a Hex Drinker. I am not sure which is better, the second Hex Drinker or the third Fatal Push, but I do think we're supposed to leave both Unearths in over them because they do play a lot of spot removal. They play, you know, Lightning Axe, and then some number of things like Trophy or Push or whatever, more kill spells, basically. We gotta buy back our Skoozes, our Goyfs, our Plague Men, even our Dark Confidants can be very good here, so I think we're supposed to leave in 2 Unearths and cut either a Fatal Push or a Hex Drinker. Let's just say it's Hex Drinker, we're a little more hedged this way, and that's a really, really good 60 in my view on the play. And then on the draw, like I said, we can bring back a Thoughtseize, we can cut a Collective Brutality. This can be a little bit too slow on the draw sometimes. And basically sideboarding something just like that. Alright, so we like our game 2 hand. The mana's a little bit painful, but we've got some Grave Hate into a Premier Threat into another hate piece in the form of the Plague Man, so it's a definite keep. And I did choose to run out and go get a swamp here. This was actually a tough decision because, of course, you don't really want to fetch swamps when you have Scavenging Ooze in your deck against a graveyard deck, but given the fact we already have double green, we can make another green with Field of Ruin, and the fact that we might need to be shocking in along the curve at some point, I just decided to respect my life total, and we couldn't fetch and shock anyway if we wanted to. There's no other Overgrown Tomb in the deck. I didn't want to go get Forest there because then we're not as likely to be able to activate the Spell Bomb. And another note here, I do feel obligated to run out the Spell Bomb because we do have such a curve. The only problem is, of course, we're running it into possible destruction before it gets any value. And indeed, on our end step, that is what happens. Opponent will exile Satyr Wayfinder to force a Vigor in order to just kill our Nile Spellbomb. And that is a sad thing, but at least they pitched an Enabler. However, they did keep a full 7, so presumably they have more Enablers around, but definitely still hurts to get the Spellbomb forced on turn 1. Feels really, really bad. We saw fetching for Tomb, tapping for black. We feared the Stixure Supplier. It is only Carrion Feeder. Carrion Feeder is a very, very good card, but we're just happy they didn't fill up the graveyard right away, right? So we draw Dark Confidant for turn, and I actually chose to play that out. So, number 1, we don't have to shock in to do that. That's nice. Number 2, we are suspicious because they did not have a turn 1 supplier. They might not have other enablers if they pitched a Wayfinder. You know, maybe they have another Wayfinder, but they might have kept a hand with a bunch of answers. Force a Vigor and maybe a kill spell. So I would rather lose the Bob than the Goyf, I think, to a kill spell, all else being equal. And Bob arguably has the highest payoff if he does stick. So that's the logic there. It's a pretty good draw. Indeed, the opponent has an answer. It's a Lightning Axe, but notably they only pitched a Swamp. No value, you know, not a Vengevine, not a Gravecrawler, just having to kind of 2-for-1 themselves a couple times. So we're well on our way to winning the value-oriented game, and the opponent just chips in for 1 with Carrion Feeder. So we draw Thoughtseize. Pretty good draw, but I don't know. I'm suspicious for Thoughtseize either whiffing or just being suboptimal here. I think it's correct when Carrion Feeder is on the field to take your clean kill on it before they find something else to sack to it and make it even bigger. So we don't want to let them get ahead of the Plague Man. We're just going to name Zombie, which is overall the best thing to name anyway, especially when it kills a Carrion Feeder. That feels really, really good. So another great little display from the Plague Man here. Opponent will go Faithless Looting, and they loot away a land and an Engineered Explosives. More removal, so they seem to have kept a really removal-heavy hand. EE, a little bit clunky against the Plague Man, I guess, so they just looted away, trying to find some action. So we draw Scavenging Ooze. That's a very, very welcome sight. And let's attack with the Plague Man, see what they've got. They've got nothing. Okay, so we get our damage across first because maybe they're sitting on more removal or more action. We want to, you know, get our hit in before they decide to maybe spend it in response here. So they do have a response to our Thoughtseize, and it is going to be Assassin's Trophy. Now, I had a pretty good idea that this Thoughtseize was going to whiff, so why did I cast it? Well, because I don't want to run the Scooz out into, you know, possible removal next turn, even if it's top decked. I definitely want to clear the way for removal this turn. And, you know, if we're not using this black mana to double spell with a Scooz and a Goyf, we're not using it for anything at all unless we Thoughtseize. So that's why we Thoughtseize, and the Thoughtseize is going to whiff, but their removal happens to be Trophy, which is actually kind of nice for us, lets us go get a Forest, and then we get to just play our Scooz. And so let's take a look at their graveyard. They have actually nothing that we care about, nothing that gets them any kind of value at all besides Faithless Looting. and their removal, we're not playing around Lightning Bolt or anything. We don't need to make it a 4/4. If it's damage based, it's going to be Lightning Axe, right? So we just eat the looting, and then we hold up the other activation. And the opponent will draw and do nothing. They're going to pass to us, so end step, sure, we'll start getting bigger. We find another Plague Engineer off the top. That's a beautiful thing. Let's attack. So no blocks before damage. We'll eat out of our own graveyard to become a 4/4. And then the compromise I like here is playing Tarmogoyf rather than the Plague Man, because Goyf provides a much more significant clock. The opponent's dead. Even if they have a form of removal this turn, they're dead in 2 hits to either of these things, and it still lets us hold up an activation just in case we need it, right? So finally, Sandbagging Plague Man allows us to blow out any kind of a blocker, even if we have to name Satyr, to get rid of Satyr Wayfinder. So I like running out the Goyf over the Plague Man there, even though it's a little less mana efficient, and it's good enough, so the opponent just scoops it up. So that was a really nice... That game panned out really nicely, even though our turn 1 Spellbomb got forced without getting any kind of value out of it. The opponent had a hand chock full of answers. They didn't have the combo-esque nature of the deck fit and firing, and we were proactive enough to put them away really quickly. We had Plague Man to clear out the Carrion Feeder and start the clock. We forced them into removing the Plague Man, followed up with the Ooze, and then Goyf came around to slam the door shut on the matchup. So that was a really, really nice one, but it's going to be a little bit tougher on average on the draw, and that's where we're going to be for Game 3. So let's see how that pans out. Okay, so you may have heard me talk about this before in the past. I am way more comfortable keeping a Thoughtseize or Inquisition into Skoo's hand on the play. On the play, if you have enough lands to make the Skoos good, and you Fatal Push also works very well alongside Skoos, I think this is a pretty great hand, even though it lacks the hard Grave Hate against this deck. On the draw, it's a lot scarier to have to lean on the stuff and to not have like a Surgical or a Spellbomb, but I did decide to keep it, and one of the reasons for that is because the opponent took a mulligan. So if the opponent had kept 7, I would have thought long and hard about whether to keep it, but with the opponent taking them all to 6, I did decide to keep, and then the opponent takes another maul all the way down to 5, so that's good for us. This deck keeping 7 in the first 2 games is a little bit rough. We always like to see the linear decks have to maul to find their stuff. And the turn 1 play is a Mirror Gravecrawler, not the scariest, so gives us a Blooming Marsh is a good draw too, because we just want all the painless green, and we have mana sinks in the rest of our land base, and gives us the green light to Thoughtseize. And we see EE and Crawler. Well, pretty easy take of the EE, because not only does that answer our Skoos, if we take the Gravecrawler, they can just play it because they've got another one on the field. So obvious take of EE there. And they've got indeed the Gravecrawler coming out, and the Bloodstained Mire that we knew about. So 1 unknown in hand. Gonna hit us for 2, and we're starting to flood out a little bit. And what do we do here? Well, we have a couple choices. We could say, all right, we're going to slow roll the Scavenging Ooze a little bit, but we're not really doing anything if we don't. Like, we can have the subtle advantage of like deploying a Hissing Quagmire, but like there's no value in Fatal Pushing these Gravecrawlers. It would turn our Fatal Push into a card that says gain 2 life, because unless we can deal with both, they're just going to keep coming back. So I think all we can do here is run out the Skoos and force them to have something. Now, we saw their hand a turn ago. We know they don't have anything. We know they didn't have anything yet. So they're dependent on top decking an answer to the Skoos, otherwise we're going to be in really good shape. Opponent will go Stixure Supplier, and Supplier will mill over Hogaak, so that is very alarming. Another reason we had to play the Skoos out there is so we can start attacking the graveyard, of course, beginning next turn. So we gotta hope their last card is not a Fatal Push, and it wasn't. It was a Bloodstained Mire. However, putting that card in the graveyard allows them to have, as is so often the case, exactly enough cards to delve away in order to cheat the Hogaak out. So, that all of a sudden is very alarming. The opponent was totally dependent on the top deck of a Stitcher Supplier and the blind mill of a Supplier to find a Hogaak. Basically anything else we can deal with, I think, with a Skooz unanswered, but this is a pretty tough one, so they chip in for 2 of the Gravecrawler. We're kind of at the point where we need to top deck a trophy, and we do. Absolutely, really fortunate to do that. Again, the opponent's top decks and hits, respectively, have been quite nice, but so have ours, my friends, so have ours. Assassin's Trophy. Trophy, I've said this a lot before, it is an underappreciated card because it's a feel-bad, because when you're casting it on curve against fair decks, you're like, oh, ramping them sucks. I really wish this was just an Abrupt Decay, but this card lets us do so much more in the meta than we used to be able to, and tagging Hogaak is definitely big game right now. So here come the goons. Trophy's going to go ahead and take care of the Hogaak, and the opponent's going to trophy us right back. So, you know, technically if I was playing around Trophy, I would have assigned a block first, right? But, you know, I just... yeah, they top decked a trophy of their own, so that is actually awful. So not only do we not get to block anything and not get to gain life and eat something, the Hogaak gets to come back next turn unless we find an answer. So that is absolutely terrifying. Both players have been top decking like crazy this game, and we're getting hit by a big board. Now, what do we do? Do we try to buy more turns by casting a Fatal Push here? Well, I thought about it, but then I said, no, that does not get us anywhere. It's just simply not going to get us where we need to be. We need to crack Peatland this turn instead. So instead, we just take this big hit for 5. We're down to 8, and we've got to find an answer to the Hogaak, and we've got to find an answer to the board. So we really need to see 2 cards. We're going to crack the Peatland and cross our fingers. And what do our 2 cards happen to be, my friends? Well, it's the good old Nile Spellbomb and the Plague Man. The Plague Man has arrived, and the zombies are going to be sorry that they ever crawled out of their graves. So we're going to go Nile Spellbomb, Plague Man naming zombies. Oh, that's a zombie, and yep, that's a zombie too. So bye-bye zombies. Stitcher Supplier mills over a couple of Bloodghasts. Very good card to have in your graveyard. So I guess we're just going to exile those too along with everything else. Feels really good. Obviously we have to do that main phase, so, you know, they don't top deck like a Fetch Land and get their Bloodghast back. And that was just incredible. I can't tell you how good that was. And the opponent takes their draw and just passes. But... you know, the opponent's still at 18 life. It could be a long game from here, and we're continuing to not have all that much left in hand. A couple Fatal Pushes is fine, but there it is. So the opponent passes again, and we find a Tarmogoyf. That's what we wanted to see, my friends. But we're going to fire up the Hissing Quagmire here because we do want to end the game as quickly as possible. And the 2 explanations for the opponent not really doing anything here, well, there are more than 2, but 2 of the more dangerous ones are... number 1, them sandbagging a Hogaak that they can't do anything with yet, and number 2, them having removal. They could also just have lands that they want to bait out our discard with, but if they have removal, if it's the latter, I want to draw out like Fatal Push right now on my Hissing Quagmire, if possible, but either the opponent doesn't take the bait or that's not what they have. So, second main, we're just going to go get another basic forest, respecting our low life total, and play that Goyf. And we're shields down with Fatal Push for a turn. That should not matter for a turn unless they have a crazy Bloodghast turn here. And the opponent does indeed have Stitcher Supplier. It's going to immediately die to the Plague Man. They get a Bloodghast back, but they don't have a land. Interesting, so they're sandbagging something else. And the rest is not good. They would rather have these cards to actually play. And then a bunch of lands, they lose a Fatal Push as well. So not a great hit for the opponent, but we're continuing to flood. We draw Twilight Mire, so we're going to go ahead and fire up the Quagmire. Now, I make a mistake here this turn, my friends. It's a very minor one, but see if you can see it. But we're going to move to attacks. I do like attacking all out here, just again trying to be proactive and end the game. And we put the opponent down to 3 because Tarmogoyf is massive, and now even if they can answer the Goyf, they're dead to the other 2 things. And it's back to the opponent. And so now that we're on the next turn, I'll point out my mistake. I should not have tapped Twilight Mire. I should have tapped this other forest, I guess, because now I can only cast one Fatal Push this turn. Now, that might not matter, but if the opponent just goes absolutely crazy this turn, it would be nice to have a Fatal Push, but it's worth noting that we technically can't die unless it's to, like, a bunch of Venge Vines, in which case we'd be fielding to get the Revolt trigger and only cast one Fatal Push anyway. If they had all 4 Bloodghast in the deck and had the Nut Draw this turn, then maybe, but anyway, just a very, very minor thing. I guess maybe technically they have nothing that can specifically punish us for it, so maybe not a misplay. After all, the opponent will tap out, getting all the graveyard mechanics going again, but it's just too little too late. The Plague Man is keeping all zombies off the field, and the Tarmogoyf is going to end their lives with a couple Fatal Pushes as backup. So that one feels really good, my friends. The Bridge from Below ban has elicited mixed reviews. Some people have said that it's not enough and that we need to ban looting and or Hogaak. I'm not going to argue against that. I mean, these cards are clearly big problems in Modern. More specific to Golgari midrange, some people have said that the ban of Bridge from Below is bad for us because we were really able to tech heavily against the deck, and we knew it was going to be a gigantic part of the meta, and that's good for us to have something to really tech against as an answer deck. While the logic there is sound, I actually don't agree with that take, because a progression like the ones we had here in games 2 and 3, where we're not winning with a big parade of hard graveyard hate, we only had one good Spellbomb activation this whole match. We're winning with Discard and Scavenging Ooze and Tarmogoyf and Plague Engineer. Those are the cards that won us the game. And against Bridge from Below and Altar of Dementia, that's just not happening anywhere near as often. Like, we just needed harder hate, or we were going to lose that matchup a significant percentage of the time. So even though, yes, the field has broadened a little bit in the wake of the Bridge from Below ban, and that might be a little less than ideal in terms of us knowing exactly how to construct our 75, we still want to play a lot of graveyard hate, because these decks are still very common. There's also Dredge with Hogaak, and there's also Hollow One with Hogaak, and there's also Phoenix and everything else under the sun. And so we still really want all of these value-oriented graveyard pieces. And so we're still, it's not like we're losing out on, don't we play graveyard hate? The answer is yes, play your graveyard hate. And our softer hate pieces are so much more effective now than they ever used to be against Bridge from Below. Plague Man has just been absolutely dominant so far in these first 2 matches. No exception here. Absolutely key piece of the puzzle against the Hogaak decks. Naming Zombie is great. Naming Vampire can be very, very relevant as well. And as mentioned, you can even name Satyr to clear out one of their few pieces that does not recur, and that can actually be really nice too. Depends on the texture of the game, of course, but yeah, feels good, my friends. We got there, and yeah, I'm glad Bridge from Below is banned. Now we can compete with this deck with our fair cards and have, in my view, a pretty decent shot. Doesn't always go our way, but sometimes it does, and this was a great example of it. So good games, well played to the opponent. We're 2-0, my friends. See you for round 3. And here we are for round 3, my friends, on the play with a nice hand. It's a pretty nice hand. We got Inquisition into push, or just deploying creature lands into Liliana. Definitely feels good. We have not seen much of Liliana this league, and definitely a nice one to see in a blind game 1. So we'll begin with Blooming Marsh Inquisition, and we see mismatched snow-covered islands. All right, and whole lot of blue cards, so it looks like some mono blue something or other. Let's try to figure out what it is. There is Mausoleum Wanderer, obviously a big sign for spirits, but Force of Negation and Disrupting Shoal, neither of which are very common in spirits decks, especially main deck. Curious Obsession, you do see the spirits variant that plays this card. It's just when your creatures have built-in evasion It's a nice pump effect, and if it connects once, it replaces itself. And of course, Snowball's completely out of control if you hit with it over and over again. And Vendilion clicks, so I think there's enough non-common things, plus seeing 2 islands. We know this is not Spirits. Looks like some kind of mono-blue tempo deck. So what do we take? Well, we have Fatal Push for the turn 1 Mausoleum Wanderer, so I don't think it's correct to take the Wanderer. And I also don't think it's correct to take away Shoal or Force, because if they want a 2-for-1 themselves, that's totally fine, and they're not really anywhere near to hard casting those spells anyway. Curious Obsession, therefore, is one possible take, or Vendilion Click is another one. Could go either way here, but at the end of the day, I said Vendilion Click with its 3 mana CMC 3 cost and its native Flash. Both of those things line up better against Fatal Push and against Liliana, so I decided to just go ahead and take it away. Interesting hand from the opponent, interesting deck, and interesting decision there, but I do think that is correct, and indeed the opponent will go Mausoleum Wanderer, pass. Now, it's back to us, and the opponent could... the opponent is almost certainly going to put the Curious Obsession on the Wanderer. So is it correct to say pass, let them have it, and then try to push that thing and 2-for-1 them? I say no, because we know they have a Disrupting Shoal in hand. If they find another CMC 1 spell, they can blow us out, and then they have a creature just connecting every turn with the Obsession. Also, they could just be playing like Spell Pierces, Mono Leaks, they could draw something like that. So I think we should just take our guaranteed kill. We, as far as we know, are leaving them without any creatures in hand, and we're in a very good position. So that's why we main phase that. Opponent runs out that other island that we know about, and it's back to us, and unfortunately we have flooded a bit, but now we drew another Liliana, so it was going to be correct to jam her either way, but now it's really nice. Even if they have a counter, we can have a backup Liliana for turn 4. So opponent will 2-for-1 themselves, pitching Disrupting Shoal and forcing Liliana, which would have been, again, fine with us either way, especially since we have a backup, it's especially fine. However, this is a lot less fine. They flash in a Spell Stutter Sprite, they don't get us with it, but just the fact that it's a flash flyer, this is exactly what I didn't want to happen. This is exactly why I took the Vendilion Click, and they drew another flash creature, so that is quite bad. And now they get to slap the Curious Obsession on this thing and start rebuilding their hand. Definitely not great. And it's a 2-2, you know, it's a clock that could add up over time. We're obviously nowhere near to it being a real danger yet, but we've got to kill it, that's for sure. So back to us. We draw Tarmogoyf. Yeah, a fine draw. I'm pretty happy with any form of action. I would have been more comfortable with a kill spell, obviously. Abrupt Decay would have been ideal. But we'll just start out with trying the Liliana. They've got a Spell Pierce for it. That was on my radar. No way we could have played around it. So, fair enough. You got us. We run out the Treetop Village, and we pass. Opponent gonna keep rebuilding the hand with that Spell Stutter Sprite. The curiosity on that thing is legendary. And now they're on 4 lands. I don't know if a deck like this is likely to play Cryptic Command, but it should be on our radar. Hexdrinker is the play. Or Hexdrinker is the draw, rather, but let's lead on the Tarmogoyf. Like I said, Spell Pierce is on the radar. They turned out to have it. Monoleak could have been on the radar too, but so for that reason, it could be nice to shock in the Overgrown Tomb and cast the Tarmogoyf. That said, I don't think they're going to Monoleak the Goyf just to kind of use up our mana anyway, so I decided to just run it out, conceal information, and Hexdrinker might be the optimal threat here anyway, because we have so much mana and they're so instant-based that if we can stick it and get it to level 3, we might be in really good shape. The opponent does spend... they hardcast a Disrupting Shoal, so that's pretty nice for them, but we do get to stick the Hexdrinker. Unfortunately, we're just not quite at level 3, but still feels good to get that down. Under potential counter magic, but look how the tables have turned. Curious Obsession OP, the opponent is just refilled their hand like nobody's business, and we're totally in top deck mode. And then they've got a main phase Vapor Snag, you know. fair enough. I think they could have just waited till until we activated to use one of our pieces of mana for the following turn, but they're just going to play it safe and just main phase Vapor Snag. We'll try the Hex Drinker again, and then we could try to just level it up right here, right now, but they're showing us Vapor Snag. Who knows what else they have. I'm going to run out the Skoos here. Skoos is actually a pretty good draw too, right? Because we are inclined to race them, and now they have two problematic permanents to deal with. The life gain of Skoos, because there are a couple creatures in the graveyard, even though we're against a mono-blue deck. The life gain of Skoos is indeed going to extend the game a little bit if they keep kind of trying to tempo us out. So I chose to activate Hex Drinker once, and kind of split the difference between the two. Even if we had activated it twice, we're not going to get to level 8 next turn unless we top deck an untapped land. So I like leaving a Skoos activation open here in case they're on Snapcaster Mage or something, at least for the bulk of their turn. And the opponent will hit us again. Then they're going to play another Curious Obsession. Very frightening, my friends. Very frightening indeed. That makes me feel priced into, opening us up to, like, Snapcaster, Vapor Snag, whatever. I think we just got to use our mana efficiently, and that resolves. They have no other effects, so Skoos gets a little bigger. We draw Fatal Push. Okay, good draw, and I think we just have to give it a shot. We're just going to main phase it so we have full information. All the mana open in case Skoos is a factor, but the opponent has Force of Negation for it. And they're pitching Ninja of the Deep Hours rather than just simply hard-casting Force, which is very interesting. Shows us that they have another effect of some kind in hand. We're going to try to draw it out or play around it by getting the Hex Drinker up to level 3. And that works, so good enough. We'll go to attacks. See what happens here. So before damage, we'll try to increase our clock here with the Skoos. And they do have another Vapor Snag. Fair enough, I still don't regret activating that, even though it means we cannot redeploy the Skoos. So we're kind of all in on the Hex Drinker now. We'll put it to level 4. And we did successfully buy ourselves a turn. They now have to hit us 4 times with a Sprite rather than 3. And, but they're drawing 2 cards per turn. Whoa. We're back. Sorry about that, guys. I accidentally hit play, so let's rewind it a little bit. I think we were around here. I don't remember exactly where we were, but we're getting hit for 3 per turn. I think this is right where we were, and the opponent's drawing 3 cards per turn as well, so Curious Obsession getting completely out of control. We rip Vraska Golgari Queen, so once again, we're continuing to find removal after they connect and draw a bunch of cards, so it's unlikely that she resolves. What do we do here? Very interesting decision. Do we put Hex Drinker up to 8? Or do we play the Vraska Golgari Queen? Or do we, in some strange universe, just play Skoos instead? The problem with playing Skoos, of course, is that it doesn't change the clock on their end much. It only can gain us 1 life at the moment. So racing them with Hex Drinker is actually kind of viable here, but we can't have a very mana-efficient turn if we do so. The last mana is just kind of sitting doing nothing. And, if we do kill this thing, we're going to win. So at the end of the day, it's a toss-up, but I did, at the end, decide to run out the Vraska Golgari Queen, make them have yet more permission, and it's another Force of Negation, pitching Mausoleum Wanderer. So we're getting forced left, right, and center here. And it's kind of funny because they've drawn a billion cards, but they're still even on cards with us because they keep having to 2-for-1 themselves with Force. But hey, that's the synergy of the deck, Curious Obsession rebuilds, and then Force lets you have 0 mana counter magic. So we put a level on Hex Drinker, and then all we can do is just pass it, and we're going to get hit for 3 again. They're going to see another 3 cards minimum this turn, and refuel that hand. Making land drop number 5 and then passing back to us. We draw Dark Confidant. Very poor draw here, so what do? Well, I said let's just see if they have any effects at all that can be drawn out by this. Obviously we have immunity from instants, but let's try to put it all the way up to level 8. And then let's try to move to attack, see if they do indeed have Cryptic Command. I think they'd be priced into doing it. And they don't, so we're looking like we might connect. And we do connect. So notably, our chip damage has added up, and our life gain from the Skoos earlier on has been relevant because the opponent's dead on board next turn, and unless they find another Curious Obsession, or they have another flash creature, we are actually not dead ourselves. So part of me just kind of wanted to bluff here, in case of the aforementioned things, bluff like Abrupt Decay or even push or something, but in the end I said, let's just play out the Skoos, just play out the Skoos here, make them have something, and they've got the hard cast Shoal for it, sure, but do they have a way to beat our Hex Drinker? Opponent will make a land drop, they're going to attack, they're going to see yet more cards, they've gone through half of their deck just about at this stage, and then they're going to scoop it up. So that was a hairy one, my friends. I do like our take of Vendilion Clique with our turn 1 discard. I do also like our Fatal Push right away on the Mausoleum Wanderer rather than trying to bait them into casting the Obsession on it and then pushing it at the risk of getting blown out by Monoleak or Spell Pierce or any other 1-mana card plus Disrupting Shoal. For all of our efforts, the opponent did still manage to find a third creature right away on curve. They've cast her on turn 2, and then Curious Obsession got completely out of control here, so it was a really close one at the end of the day. But Hex Drinker, I'm sure they had more cards like Vapor Snag or something, just rotting in hand, and the immunity here, and the clock, and the inability to be blocked just got us there by the skin of our teeth. The skin of our fangs, maybe, in the case of Hex Drinker. So a really, really interesting game one against a mono-blue tempo deck. You don't see that every day. And let's take a look at how we should be sideboarding against something like this. So against the mono-blue tempo deck, I think based on what we saw, we should be sideboarding conservatively. Now, obviously, this is subject to change if and when we see something else in Game 2, and if they also manage to take us to Game 3. But having seen what we saw, they didn't really show us graveyard mechanics, so I'm not interested in Nile Spellbomb. Maybe they're on Snapcaster, we didn't see it, but on the evidence of that, I don't know that that's too likely. And nothing else is of particular appeal or import. So the two shoo-ins, I think, are Collective Brutality and Liliana the Last Hope. Liliana grinds really well and can kill their X1s for fun, and Collective Brutality can, of course, kill their evasive attackers and strip cards out of their hand. Both very, very good. Plague Engineer is a little bit tougher to rate because they did show us Spell Stutter Sprite and Vendilion Clique as fairies, but they also showed us Mausoleum Wanderer as a spirit. And those creatures are not a big problem unless they have Curious Obsession stapled onto them. And if they have that, then one Plague Man anyway, is not killing them anyway. So I don't know exactly how to rate Plague Engineer in this matchup, especially because we haven't seen their whole deck. So I think we are going to bring in these two cards and then however many Plague Men to fill up the numbers based on what we want to side out. And honestly, I think most of our deck is pretty good against what they're up to. I decided to move completely away from Unearth here. I don't think they're putting all that many creatures into the yard, and if they do, it's in more of a tempo-oriented way, whereas, I think we have the luxury of cycling Unearth more against a control deck than we do against a tempo deck, is what I'm trying to say. I think we can trim a discard spell. Remember, we are on 6, even if we trim one, plus 2 Collective Brutality, and they didn't show me anything that Inquisition couldn't hit, so Thoughtseize is the one to trim. And again, it's a mono-blue deck. They might be on Relic of Progenitus or something anyway. Skoos is going to be not that impactful, again, until we see graveyard mechanics out of them, so I think these 4 are pretty safe cuts. I kind of like everything else. A lot of this 3-drop slot here is quite clunky, is vulnerable to getting blown out pretty hard by Spell Pierce or Monoleak or things like that, but they're all high-quality cards. The card quality is pretty high. If we can manage to force them through, they're all going to be pretty good. And again, since we don't know how great Plague Engineer is, I think I'd rather just play 2 and keep these other more removal-oriented or long-game-oriented cards, as the case may be, in. So I like the setup a lot, but for anyone out there who might be more experienced, feel free to let me know what you think. But this is how we set up. Let's take a look at Game 2. Well, my friends, we are on the draw, and it's a risky one-lander, but my god, is it powerful. Fatal Push and Thoughtseize are two cards we really want to see in the opening hand. Abrupt Decay is absolutely awesome in this matchup. There's no question about that. And we've got Dark Confidant, and we've got Double Liliana if we can just hit our lands. I think we're still pretty priced into mulling this on the play. The one-lander is just a bit too risky maybe on the play. But here on the draw, I decided to give it a shot, and I do think the payoffs are very much there to make the risk worthwhile. Opponent goes turn 1 Island into Terramander, having kept 7, and there's another, more diversity in the creature type. Salamander, Drake, okay. Plague Man doesn't like to see that so much. And look at that, we top deck the Forest, never didn't have it, so we go Blooming Marsh. And here, obviously there's some consideration for holding up Fatal Push, or just main phasing Fatal Push, but I said, okay, Thoughtseize you, if you have more than one Curious Obsession and a way to protect it next turn, then you got us. But I think it's fairly safe to Thoughtseize here, and we see they're on a 2-lander, the second land being Mutavault, which is interesting. They do have a Curious Obsession, but there's only the one. They also have a Dismember. They also have Disrupting Shoal and Spell Pierce. Yeah, great way to protect from Fatal Push there. So we just go ahead and take away Curious Obsession, and the rest of their hand all kind of falls apart without it. It's a lot of, Dismember trades 1-for-1, but at the loss of life, and the rest of it is all a little bit weak. Like, tempo decks just play weak cards. That's the secret to beating a tempo deck, is you need to not get tempoed out, you need to trade as efficiently as possible early on, and eventually on a mid-range deck, your card quality should be able to carry the day if you get it to the stage where it can really shine. So in any case, the opponent will deploy the Mutavault, smack us with the Terramander, and then play a Fairy Seer, so another fairy, interesting to know, and just a little evasive attacker that scries, and then they'll pass back to us. Shields down for the turn as far as the Spell Pierce goes, and we draw Collective Brutality. Very nice draw, very nice draw. So how would we like to use this? Well, I think using it for the life gain is a little bit aggressive here, especially given how good our hand is, but I'm pretty happy to escalate once and trade 2 for 2. Kill the Terramander before it can adapt. Remember that adaptability is very, very good, very annoyingly good if it gets that far. And then we get to take our choice of spells from the hand. They are all eligible, and I chose to take the Dismember because it is the most reliable 1-for-1 trade they have. And it also, if they don't find anything good this turn, allows us to go Bob next turn and then start kind of curving out and pulling really, really far ahead. So that's the plan. Take away the Dismember, allow Bob to stick and run away with the game. But the opponent rips a Curious Obsession right off the top. That puts a stop to our plans pretty hard. Fortunately, we do have ways to answer it, but they definitely needed to find something like that to stay in this game, and that's exactly what they did. We, meanwhile, find a second Bob, which is pretty awkward. So I thought about main phasing Abrupt Decay. Obviously, we don't have to play around Shoal or Pierce because Decay is uncounterable. I still thought about doing it, though. They could be on something like a Rattle Chains, for all I know, to blow us out. But at the end of the day, I decided that they will have seen 2 cards by the time they move to attacks, one from connecting with this last turn and one from their draw step. I said it's likelier that they find another Curious Obsession. We know they're on 4, rather than they're on Rattle Chains and they happen to find it. So we risk the blowout here with Abrupt Decay. And we don't get blown out, we just get them, we just kill them, that's really nice. And they didn't hit a 3rd land either, so they're holding up Spell Pierce here. And we find a Collective Brutality, once again a good draw, but we know that that's going to get pierced, and we know that we still want to start curving out with our lands and try to stick a Bob. So at this point, I'm very happy to run out of Bob. Even if they have removal, we do have a backup one in hand, but they've got nothing on the end step. And they've got nothing on their main phase, so they have 3 unknowns in hand. They have rebuilt the hand quite well, but the Bob is, we're untapping with Bob, and Bob is finding us Inquisition and Swamp. Pretty nice, not gonna lie. So we'll begin going Swamp into Inquisition, playing around Spell Pierce this way. And the opponent will, therefore, 2-for-1 themselves, pitching that Pierce and shoaling the Inquisition. Fair enough. So that's just wonderful for us. These cards can play a role against us like Shoal and Force, but they're not particularly good, and here's a great example as to why. So we're going to offer the trade if they want to fire up Mutavault. That's actually great for us because we have another Confidant, and that just Stone Rains them, but they don't. So here, I thought about playing another Bob, and indeed I almost did, but then I'm saying, okay, what if they have, like, End Step, Spell Stutter Sprite, untap, play a Curious Obsession, and then we get some really bad Bob hits and they just outrace us. So I think the safer thing to do is play the Collective Brutality here. And with 3 cards in hand, I think it's pretty unlikely to whiff, but that's exactly what happens, They have Vendilion Click, they have Ninja of the Deep Hours, and they have Threads of Disloyalty. 3 kind of scary cards, all things considered, and indeed our Collective Brutality will sadly whiff. So it's been some like weird 2-for-1s and 1-for-0s in this game. Definitely interesting. The one consolation prize we had is that the opponent didn't have the 3rd land, but they immediately top deck it. So make no mistake, the opponent has been drawing pretty well this game in some pretty crucial times, and they're going to go ahead and convince the Bob to turn traitor. So what can we do about that? Well, we draw Nurturing Peatland, and that's actually a pretty good draw, because this lets us kill the treasonous Bob. Liliana's gonna punish him for his treason, and then we get to hold up Fatal Push here as well, which means we get to protect our Liliana from the Mutavault. And we'll see if the opponent wants to try to get her off the field right away, and indeed that's the plan. So this actually plays right into our hands. We, of course, let the Mutavault tap first, and then we're going to push. And that succeeds. The opponent stranded with 1 unknown and 2 clunkers in hand. Would have been a potentially bigger problem for us if they had decided to hold up Vendilion Click instead. I don't think that's the wrong play, but it definitely worked out well for us. We draw a land, which is actually kind of perfect, because we can totally empty out our hand while playing around Monoleak to run out the Bob, and the opponent just scoops up to that. So that's what I mean about card quality, my friends. The efficiency of Fatal Push, the recursive value of Liliana, the inevitability provided by Dark Confidant, even Nurturing Peatland providing another card draw, definitely was enough to force the scoop out of our opponent here. The opponent had their windows where they nearly were successful in taking over the game on the tempo axis, but we were able to stave that off, and we reached the late game. We reached the late game successfully, and it's kind of all over but the crying from here, given the opponent's hand and given our board state. So that was a really interesting matchup. Game 1, once again, came right down to the wire. We won at 1 life through the opponent drawing like 10 cards off of Curious Obsession, them 2-for-1ing themselves a lot, and then rebuilding with the Obsession. It was a really, really interesting game, and it's a really interesting deck. People have tried to make mono-blue control, mono-blue tempo, these types of things work for a long time in Modern. A lot of people thought Jace the Mind Sculptor would be the key to unlocking these decks. That turned out not to be the case, but Force of Negation actually gives these decks a lot more of a leg up than they ever had before. So maybe don't be the most surprised if you see this deck out and about in the leagues. And I do think our matchup is pretty fine, though. We got there, again, despite the opponent having some pretty good top decks, we got there 2-0 here. So good games well played to the opponent. I hope, my friends, that you are enjoying this donation league in replay form, and let's take a look at round 4. Okay, so we won the die roll, and for the first time I feel, and not the first time because we have had to take mulligans, but I have a little bit of an awkward sense about this hand, merely because we do need the 3rd land for Liliana, and we don't have a threat, and we have double trophy, which could be either really good or really awkward depending on the matchup, but nevertheless it's a keep. It's a functional hand with lands and spells, and double discard is awesome in a blind game 1. The opponent goes turn 0 Gemstone Caverns, exiling Walking Ballista, which is never what we like to see, but that's what happens. So we're going to go ahead and lead on the Inquisition and see what exactly the opponent's up to, and I would venture to say that it's most Rock players' least favorite deck at this point in time, which is Eldrazi Tron, and they have another Walking Ballista where that came from. and a Chalice of the Void, and a Smasher, and a Temple, and an Urza's Tower. So it's a really, really powerful hand, and they basically stole the play from us by that Gemstone Cavern. So what do we take here? Well, there's actually a lot of consideration for taking Walking Ballista because there's no easy way for us to deal with it. Obviously, we don't want to trophy it to ramp them, and we can't successfully Edict it with Liliana because then it pings her back and we're just trading a Lily for a 1/1 Ballista. It's terrible. Nevertheless, we kind of have to take Chalice of the Void so we can Thought, because they're going to turn 1 Chalice us otherwise, and that's just one of many lovely things this deck does, and we need our Thoughtseize to take away the Smasher, right? So, kind of priced into the Chalice there. Chalice being kind of medium at best overall against us, but when you have the Gemstone Caverns and you kept 7 on the draw, Chalice gets a lot better, right? So opponent will instead have the turn 1 Walking Ballista off of the tower, and we don't really have anything better to do than play our Thoughtseize here, so we'll do it, and the opponent's got that Smasher in hand, as we knew, and they found another Urza's Tower, so thankfully there's no gas and no different Tron land. But then they rip the different Tron land off the top. It is the Power Plant, and they chip in for 1, and it's back to us. So we draw Overgrown Tomb. Now, what do we do here? Do we trade our Liliana for the Walking Ballista, or do we be a little bit more patient with it? Remember that this is Eldrazi Tron. Liliana's good on both ends. Edicting basically anything except Walking Ballista feels good, and of course Ticking Up feels good while they still have any kind of cards in hand. So I said, let's play it a little bit more cautiously. Again, these trophies, a little bit awkward. If this was a push or a decay, I would have been much happier. But we'll see what the opponent's got. So Ballista's going to attack. We're going to take the hit, wait till their end step if at all possible to avoid ramping them. And then they've got a Matter Reshaper, which is just one of these very, very annoying cards against us. Like, you just can't win against this card, I guess, unless you have Kalidas down. But the Death Trigger is super annoying when we're trying to run them out of resources and when their top decks are so powerful, right? But we are going to trophy the Ballista here, and they're going to choose to let it resolve. They don't choose to let it resolve so they can fetch. They ping us instead. And then they get the Reshaper down, but now at least that's a semi-clean Edict target for Liliana. You know, they're going to get a card off it one way or another, but it's one of our better ways to deal with it on a value axis, and we just kind of have no choice. They get a Thought-Knot Seer, and that's just all kinds of awkward because Thought-Knot's coming down next turn, and we're just shields down against it. It's going to take away our trophy, but nothing we can do about it. So opponent goes Temple into Thought-Knot. They're just putting together the value train, and there goes, as mentioned, Assassin's Trophy. However, we do draw Tarmogoyf, which is a pretty good draw, because it does outsize the Thought-Knot, and we get to take up Liliana of the Veil. And the opponent has to pitch another Thought-Knot Seer, which is just fine with us. It's only a 4/4 right now, but obviously, you know, if they answer our Goyf, that can end the game. And the opponent's got another land, so actually looking so far so good for us. Now, what do we do here on the end step? Well, we're going to crack Nurturing Peatland. We want to leave Revolt around with this fetch land in case we draw Fatal Push, right? But cracking the Peatland is pretty free. We find Field of Ruin, and we find Inquisition. So kind of some bad draws. And we had two choices here. We could say, we're just going to play defense behind the Goyf, and we're going to keep the Liliana around by ticking her up for one more turn. If this was many, many other matchups, I would have done exactly that. I am a little bit scared to do that against Eldrazi Tron, namely because of All Is Dust. Like, playing the defensive game is dangerous at the best of times against any Tron variant, but specifically against Eldrazi Tron, specifically against All Is Dust. Can you imagine how bad that would be if they top deck All Is Dust? Which they can cast, by the way, because Eldrazi Temple lets them cheat on mana for that as well. They get our Lily, they get our Goyf, and we have left the kill on the Thought-Knot plus the free card off of it on the table. I just couldn't justify doing that. They have too many good top decks. I think we need generally to end the game as quickly as possible as well, and this allows us to do that. So unfortunately, our draws continue to be bad. We hit the Twilight Mire off of that, But we've got him on a nice quick clock with the Tarmogoyf in there in total top deck mode. And on the draw step, we are going to hit the Eldrazi Temple. They've got redundancy in the Tron land, so that's the best hit. And we'll go get a Forest. What did the opponent top deck? Well, they top decked another Thought Knot. It's a bit undersized compared to the big bad Goyf. And that's the upside of us having nothing good in hand, is the Thought Knot has no good take. But we're continuing to draw blanks. We've drawn, Fuel of Ruin's not technically a blank, but it's not really changing much at this stage of the game, so we've drawn, 4 or 5 blanks in a row now? Feels pretty bad, but we are winning the race significantly with this Goyf. So let's see if the opponent has been able to out-top deck us. And they're tapping 6, and they have exactly enough mana for an Endbringer, so yeah, safe to say they're out-top decking us, pretty well. And we draw a Hissing Quagmire, so our draws have been miserable, my friends. But we are going to attack with the Goyf. And now at this point, we actually kind of want them to block with the Endbringer, so I'm going to attack before I show any other information. If the opponent is savvy, they will at least wonder whether they should block in case we have Collective Brutality to finish him off. But they don't, and that's probably the best play even if Brutality's on their radar. And then we just have to play the Quagmire and pass, so another land is terrible, but you know what? We actually are not dead on board, and the opponent will be priced into chump blocking next turn in some way, shape, or form. They're even dead to the Quagmire hit. So despite our flood of terrible top decks here, we're actually forcing the opponent to top deck something really good here yet again for the third turn running. And we'll just see how it goes. So the opponent will hit us for 9. And that's not a good sign that they felt able to attack with both. And wouldn't you know it, they top deck Walking Ballista. So this card was a thorn in our side in the beginning of the game, and it finishes us off here at the end. It's just such a frustrating matchup sometimes, my friends. The deck just goes so far over the top of us. None of our disruption is perfect. Trophy can hit anything, but it ramps them, and ramping them sucks. Decay does not ramp them, but Decay misses on a lot of these really big payoffs. Discard is all well and good, but our life total is not that free of a resource against this deck. And, of course, it turns into a mid-rangey slugfest, and discard forms, represent some pretty bad top decks, as we just saw here. So, and the deck can just still turn 3 Tron you on top of all of that, so I'm really not a fan of the deck. Karn the Great Creator is just insult to injury. A lot of pros have said that Eldrazi Tron is a bad deck, and I understand what they're saying. I wish it was a bad deck. I wish it was a bad deck. I understand they're saying it's a really high variance deck, and that's true. I wish it was just a bad deck so we didn't have to see it so much, but it's here, and it seems like it's here to stay. I made the prediction in the wake of the Bridge from Below banning that Eldrazi Tron would lose meta share and Green Tron would regain prominence in that big mana archetype. I appear to have been partially mistaken, at least, if not wholly mistaken, because Eldrazi Tron is still absolutely everywhere. Sadly for us, but in any case, my friends, we just got pretty unlucky here. I think our position was really good. It does show you just how good Tarmogoyf can be in the matchup. Tarmogoyf almost single-handedly won us this game. Tarmogoyf and Liliana with a lot of nothing in between, and we almost got there, but the opponent top decked some threats back to back to back and just barely beat us to the punch. So close game, and let's take a look at how we side. Alright, my friends, so against everybody's least favorite deck, Eldrazi Tron, I have tried a variety of sideboard configurations. I'm not really satisfied with any of them, and I think that's just to a large degree the nature of their deck, right? It's the nature of the deck to do the things I mentioned at the end of the last game. Just kind of makes most of our removal or interaction feel a little bit subpar or a little bit like the stars have to align for it to be really good. So you'll have to let me know what you've had success with. Let Chris know, let the other people in the comments know. We'd all love to hear it, but On the play, I think these 6 cards are a good starting place to cut. We can cut at least 3 of our 4 Inquisitions. We want to be more proactive on the play. We don't need discard as much, and Inquisition does whiff a good amount of the time. On the other hand, it is really nice to take away like Matter Reshaper before it hits the field, maybe Expedition Map, stuff like that. I think Hex Drinker is a little bit subpar. Even if we get it to level 3, it's still kind of only okay. It's only when you get to level 8 that it's really awesome, but even then they do play stuff like Blast Zone, All is Dust, other ways to take care of it. I think it's a little subpar. I think we can shave 1. Ditto Unearth. 1 Unearth at the right time can be a good way to keep up with them, but 2 is looking a little clunky. Collective Brutality is pretty clearly a bad card here in the matchup, too. And then from there, these other cards are potentially on the chopping block. I don't think we want both Vraska Golgari Queen and Abrupt Decay, because again, these effects just miss out on too much. But maybe we don't want to cut both either. I could see keeping the Decay just because it's more mana efficient and better in the early turns, especially hitting a map on the play with it is fine. Or if we're looking to grind and take over the game, of course, Vraska is the better option. I think we can trim a Tireless Tracker too. It's very slow, very clunky. A little bit of a non-bow with Oof if we bring in the Oof. We can trim a Skooz again, very slow, very undersized. They might be attacking the graveyard anyway. We might not be able to fill up the graveyards that well. And we could even trim the 4th Inquisition. So as you can see, there's a lot of maybes here, a lot of borderline cards. It's kind of hard to find the optimal, circumstances for all of these. I think what we ended up doing here, though, on the play... Well, let's talk about what might come in first. Of course, Plaguemen are always in contention, but unlike Eldrazi and Taxes or Eldrazi Stompy, we're not outright killing all that much with Plague Engineers, so whether we want all 4, it's kind of mostly just a Death Touch 2/2. I don't know. Kalidas is also a borderline card. I think I like him better on the play than the draw, but definitely feels bad to play a 4-mana guy that gets outsized by half, if not more, of their stuff, but the replacement effect for Matter Reshaper and the fact that he can become a 5/6 if you generate a zombie token and sack it, yeah, I think he's good enough on the play. Collector Oof, I also don't really know how to rate this card. They have some activated abilities of artifacts, and sometimes he's kind of good. Sometimes he's just depressingly bad against all of their big payoffs. It's really hard to rate. Even Fulminator Mage is not as much of a slam dunk here as it is against regular Tron, because you can just Stone Rain them, and they can just hardcast things and keep hitting land drops and curve out on you. And then Surgical Ditto. Like, in the past, I've been very unhappy with 2, because this is still a value-oriented matchup, but I think 1 is playable. So, as you can see, a little bit hard to rate, but I'll show you what we did on the play here. We brought in 3 of the 4 Plaguemen, all 3 Fulminators. We did bring in Kalidas, and we did give the Oof a shot, even though I'm not 100% sold on that. We also left this Inquisition, and we trimmed down on, threats that are clunky in multiples. We lose a Tracker, we lose a Skooz. And then we played the Surgical, and I said, alright, on the play, we'll play the Vraska, and maybe on the draw, she's better as Abrupt Decay. But again, even that doesn't seem like exact science, because once more, Decay is arguably better on the play to hit Expedition Map before they get to use it. So it's really hard to say exactly what's optimal, and the lesson here, the takeaway, is not can we increase our percentage point by 1% in this matchup by making, an alteration to what you saw here. It's really, are the cards in our 75 good enough to line up consistently against Eldrazi Tron, or do they just operate in a way that kind of naturally lines up well against us? I think the latter is pretty much true, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be striving to make our 75 the best it can be. So let me know, my friends, what you think about this level of sideboarding here, and let's take a look at Game 2. Round 4, Game 2 on the play, and I think we have to keep this hand. It does have Field of Ruin, which is really nice if we hit our 3rd land. Beyond that, it goes turn 1 Thoughtseize, turn 2 Tarmogoyf. It's got Assassin's Trophy as an answer, and some of our less impactful cards, but they could both play a pretty good role. We do need to hit our 3rd land, but looks like a pretty good keep to me on the whole. And opponent will take a mulligan down to 6. we've got Affection Shock and Thoughtseize here, very painful, but it's what we've got to do. And the opponent's hand is pretty Thoughtseize proof. They have 2 different Urza's lands and 2 Expedition maps, so unless we draw, like, yeah, there's almost nothing we can draw, because we can't even make the mana for Abrupt Decay. Not that we have it in on the play anyway, so there's basically no way we're preventing them from getting Tron, unless maybe we top deck the Oof. They also have Eldrazi Temple to make matters even worse. So do we just give up the Ghost on the land front and say, let's just take the Sorceress Spyglass? I said no, because even though they're going to be able to assemble Tron, we can't stop that. If we hit our 3rd land, we do have Field of Ruin or Assassin's Trophy, like either one. They can shut off they can shut off Field of Spyglass, but not Trophy. And maybe they would choose to name something else with a Spyglass anyway. So we do have ways to disrupt Tron, and on top of that, they don't have a payoff yet that we know of. So for that reason, I do just like taking a map there. And we draw Scavenging Ooze, very poor draw. We're seeing a lot of the, mediocre one-ofs that we've left in, and we do have a good 3-4 Goyf on the play. That's pretty nice. The other thing about leaving them with Spyglass is it forces them to decide between playing Spyglass turn 2 and then not having the map activation, or giving us the window for Field of Ruin. So the opponent's going to roll the dice with a Spyglass activation, and they are going to peep our hand and then name Field of Ruin. So definitely seems like the right play there. I don't know if it's the right play to play Spyglass. It might be safer to hold up the map, but I do know that it's the right name to name Field of Ruin there. And now that was forcing us to draw a green-black land for Trophy, and of course we don't draw any land whatsoever. The best play we have is Scavenging Ooze. We could also have main phase cycled Unearth, trying to set up a better turn next turn, but I think at this stage we just have to race as hard as possible, and that means playing Grizzly Bear. Cycling Unearth does not grow the Goyf. And the opponent doesn't have Natty Tron, that's good, and they play Eldrazi Temple out before activating the map, and then they just pass, which is very, very interesting. Don't know what to make of that, but we're just not hitting our 3rd land. It is miserable, so we have Trophy Rotting in hand, and, I mean, that's very, very bad, obviously, against Eldrazi Tron. And the best we can do is play a Hex Drinker and put a level on him. So we're just presenting a clock, and at this point we're so far behind in terms of curving out how we want to curve out and developing our mana and all that, that we're not playing for any kind of a value axis anymore. We are just playing out like mediocre threats and saying, can you beat this? Do you have a payoff? Then they finally go fetch a mine. They have Tron. They'll untap, they'll play the mine, and they're tapping 7, so I'm afraid of all is dust. Instead, it is merely Ugin the Ineffable. So Ugin, a very, very good value card, very good against us on the whole, but as far as payoffs are concerned in this particular window, not the very scariest until this happens, until they go Ugin into double Matter Shaper. So they spent this turn on 12 mana worth of spells on turn 4. Pretty disgusting. Of course, Ugin's passive plus the soul land of Eldrazi Temple just being responsible for that. Pretty grotesque, if I do say so myself. And hey, there on turn 5 we finally see another land, but it might be a little bit too late. So how do we approach this? Obviously, we can now field or trophy them off of Tron, but the damage has been done. They've got a board. I think we need to take care of the Ugin at all costs. So, unfortunately, that pretty much means just attacking into the Matter Shapers, seeing if they're going to take the trades, and they do. So, they get to trade off with the Skoos. They get 2 death triggers. They reveal Dismember, and they reveal Wastes. So, honestly, all things considered, that's not the end of the world. And we are going to, of course, trophy the Ugin this turn. We can't let them untap with Ugin. That +1 is just more value. It's good against Tarmogoyf because those things can chump block for days and keep refilling the hand. So opponent will use that free waste to dismember the Goyf anyway. We'll wait till their draw step, and then we're going to trophy the Planeswalker and hope they just don't have any more payoffs in hand. They play an Eldrazi Temple, 1 card left in hand, And they're tapping 10 mana for it, so it looks like a payoff to me. It's our old nemesis, Walking Ballista. Ballista has been just absolutely burying us this league. And we draw Blooming Marsh. So we're hitting our lands too little too late. I think the best play here is Tireless Tracker. We just need to draw a kill spell for Ballista in any way, shape, or form. And this is going to let us see 2 cards minimum next turn, so that's the best thing to do. And hopefully the opponent can give us a reprieve from drawing good stuff off the top, but nope, it's a Reality Smasher, so yeah, you gotta love it. The opponent does give us a bit of a lifeline here, I think, by allowing us to assign a block here. Means that if we draw a kill spell, we have another turn to live, whereas if they just pinged the tracker before moving to blocks, I don't think that would have been the case. But we hit a land off the top. Not very good, not what we're in the market for, and then we hit a Bob, so we are just dead, but we're going to just play out our stuff. We'll unearth a Tarmogoyf, we'll play a Bob, and make them see the correct attacks, but that's that, my friends. They just absolutely destroyed us on the back of Walking Ballista, really, both games. Like, other things came into consideration, but really the Ballista as the coup de grace in Game 1, and then the Ballista as the major payoff here after we fought through their other payoffs. Yeah, it's just a murderous matchup, my friends. It just really sucks that it's back in the meta. I do beat the deck, but it's definitely one of, if not the most dreaded opponents of the common decks at this particular juncture in the meta. I'm just not a fan of it. I'm just not a fan whatsoever. Field of Ruin is a good tool. We just if we had hit our third land, we were able to field nice and early. Things could have been very, very different, but it was not to be. And they got us good. So our 5-0 dreams are crushed by Mattery Shaper and Walking Ballista and Reality Smasher and all the other colorless goons that for some reason have access to this land. I just don't understand it, but that's Modern for you. No one ever said it was fair, but we're trying to make it fair, and we're still having a great league. It's 3-1, and let's move on to round 5. Final round of this Modern League, guys, and our misfortune continues. We've got a no-lander. We've got to throw it on back. And what do we think about this 6? Well, it's going to be pretty good. Definitely a reasonable hand. It's a little slow out of the gates, but it's got a lot going on. We'll put Blooming Marsh to the bottom for similar reasons why we put Overgrown Tomb to the bottom back earlier in the league. The opponent, however, has kept 7, and they're on the play, and it's another Urza's Tower deck, but it's got Chromatic Sphere, so this is traditional Tron, but us mulling to a hand like this, yeah, it's got Trophy, but doesn't have much else that we really like against Tron. And again, them keeping 7 on the play, not looking good, but you know what? I'm almost relieved that it's quote-unquote only Green Tron. It just seems like such a more reasonable deck to face these days than Eldrazi Tron. Karn the Great Creator notwithstanding, right? But anyway, the opponent's doing their stuff. They crack a couple eggs, they play a Power Plant, they play a Relic. So for all we know, they have turn 3 Tron lined up in hand. Feels bad, man, feels bad. We draw Dark Confidant, pretty good card in the matchup, but I deemed it unwise. Again, with them keeping 7, I think the likelihood of them having Tron in hand is high enough that we're supposed to trophy here. So we'll trophy the Power Plant. They played it second, and then they just play another Power Plant. So sometimes you just get punished. But they're clearly lacking for other things to do because they aggressively crack the Relic. And they find an Ancient Stirrings. And Ancient Stirrings finds a Karn Liberated. So, alright. We draw Inquisition. Sure. It's actually an okay draw. Thoughtseize would be better, but we see that they have Urza's Mine in hand. So unless they just found that off their draw step last turn or off the Relic crack, we were right that they had Tron lined up, and we were forced into trophying. Unfortunately, we picked the wrong land to trophy, but they played Tower turn 1 and Power Plant turn 2, so one imagines that they started the game with one of each in hand, right? In any case, I think that's usually the better practice, is to trophy the second land they play. And We take away the Oblivion Stone, which is not nothing, but they definitely have Tron, and they definitely have a lot of payoffs in hand. They have Ugin and Karn, and they can cast either one next turn. So for that reason, it is correct to simply pump a couple levels into Hex Drinker and pass. The Hex Drinker is going to die, but playing something else out just gives them a 2-for-1, or a 2-for-0, really, with Ugin. So we're going to make them only kill one thing this turn, try to pulse whatever they have, and then try to draw another answer to their second payoff, then try to fade more payoffs for the rest of the game and win the game with Bob and Tracker. That's the plan. We'll see if it works. It's pretty low odds, but I think not playing anything else out is definitely correct there. And Ugin will take care of Hexy, and then that's about that. So we, of course, pulse away the Ugin. We have no choice, and then we're going to pass. The fourth land could have been run out there to make turns efficient a little bit down the road, but again, we're kind of all in on drawing like a trophy for this Karn or something, and we're all in on them failing to hit more payoffs. So if both of those things happen, it's better to sandbag this land to let Tracker take over the game. However, opponent found an Ancient Stirrings. Ancient Stirrings found the Ulamog. They just have no lack of payoffs whatsoever. So they'll take up. We'll left exile our Bob there. And we draw land. Pretty bad stuff. So what are you going to do? We just got Tron. Again, they kept 7. They were on the play. And we trophied the land they happened to have a second copy of. And then they kept finding payoffs. Doesn't get much worse than that. So you guys have seen me play Tron enough if you've been on this channel. This is a very, very beatable matchup. I don't mind seeing it at all. Sometimes the games are pretty much non-games like that, but that's what Tron does. Tron kind of operates on an axis that is so binary that when a deck like ours is in the mix, it tends to kind of go all or nothing their way. There can be some grindy games, there can be some interesting games, but certainly a lot of game ones do go like that. So we got Tron done, we got Tron, but hey, at least we're not playing against Eldrazi, right? So let's take a quick look at the sideboard, see what to do against Mono Green Tron. So sideboarding against Mono Green Tron is a lot more straightforward than against Eldrazi Tron. All 3 Fulminators are slam dunks, 2 Surgical, very, very good, Collector Oof, very good, and Kalitas, good enough. Definitely very, very nice against a Worm Coil Engine. And between that and just being like a threat that can provide a reasonable clock, that's enough incentive to bring him in. Fatal Pushes can all come out. I like trimming 1 Unearth here. We can expect them to number 1, play limited amounts of removal, and number 2, to play Relic of Progenitus or some other form of graveyard hate. So I like trimming Unearth. And to me, it's clearer here that Abrupt Decay is better than Vraska Golgari Queen, because by the time we get to that stage of the game, we just don't have time to grind. We don't have the luxury to grind them out with Vraska, and her repeated -3s, even if we can manage that, are not that impactful. I'd rather just be able to decay a map early or an Oblivion Stone before they hit 5th mana, stuff like that. So all 6 of those cards can come out, and we need to make 1 more cut. So on the play, I like the first Brutality slightly more than the second Ooze, because it can take a Sylvan Scrying. So we'll do that, but on the draw, if we can take them to game 3, that Brutality gets even worse, and we'll just bring back basically a Grizzly Bear. So that last slot, that's what I like to do with that. But we got a lot of really good cards to bring in. Let's go to game 2. Okay, my friends, on the play against Tron, and this looks suspiciously familiar to the Eldrazi Tron hand, where we have a field and a dual land. This time, though, our hand is better. We do have Thoughtseize. We can even go turn 2 Brutality for that Sylvan Scrying, as mentioned, if we want. And we have Bobs to help us draw out of it. Field of Ruin is very, very good in this matchup. Once again, we just want to make sure we hit our 3rd land. We're going to be just fine. The opponent keeping 7 is unfortunate. Lots of really linear decks that mulligan a lot, keeping a lot of 7s against us this game, or this league, rather. But let's see what the opponent's got. They've got Forest and Urza's Mine, so not a very good start for them as far as the lands go, but they have a Stirrings and a map and a Scrying, and then they've got 2 payoffs, Worm Coil and Ulamog. So what do we take here? Well, I definitely think we take Expedition Map, because if we, like, the floor on these cards for us is that they have to play a Forest early on, unless they find a a Chromatic Star or Sphere off the top of the deck. So worst case scenario, they've got to play a Forest to cast their Stirrings. That's not the end of the world. Expedition Map is just the best ramp piece because they can cast it off a Tron land and because it tutors. So definitely taking the map there. Stirrings can also whiff on a land. It's unlikely, but it could happen as well. So opponent immediately rips a Chromatic Star. That's what we wanted not to happen. Feels bad, man. Feels bad. And we draw Tarmogoyf. Okay, so definitely an interesting decision point here. I did choose to take the route of hitting their lands, though, by way of Collective Brutality to take away the Sylvan Scrying, because we know they only have one other land in hand. Now we're forcing them to find lands off of the top and off of Stirrings. I really don't mind that, but don't get me wrong, it feels very bad to not have played a threat there. I think the threat in this case would have been Dark Confidant to ensure we hit our third land. Opponent will cantrip with the Star, and then they play a Mine before they play their Stirrings, which I think is incorrect. I think they're supposed to try to find a different Tron land off of Stirrings, but anyway, they find a map, but instead of playing the map, they find a Star. So all of their finds have been really, really good in relation to what we've done. And we do hit our third land naturally, so that's kind of cool. There is no need to field yet, so instead we're just going to play our Bob and we're going to pass. And the opponent will begin by cracking an egg. They find an Urza's Tower, which is quite good for them, and then they'll play out that map. So they've got one unknown in hand, Forest, and 2 payoffs. End step we are going to fetch because we definitely are in the market for double black and double green. We could have a, Tarmogoyf plus trophy turn at some point. And we don't really want to fetch and shock unnecessarily when we've already thought seized and when we've got a Bob on the field. Our life total is a resource here, but there's no need to be cavalier with it. However, we just get double Inquisition and no fourth land, which is actually kind of a disaster because we really wanted to be able to field the tower this turn and then play a Tarmogoyf to have a really proactive turn. And then we can untap next turn and we can have trophy at the ready and whatever else we find off of our 2 draws. Now what do we do? Well, it's actually a pretty tough call, but first thing we're going to do, of course, is get in with Bobby. Make him feel the pain, and here, I think Inquisition is likely enough to whiff. Again, there's only one unknown. They didn't cast another spell last turn. Pretty unlikely to hit, so I don't think it's worth using the Inquisition quite yet. So instead we're going to pass, we're going to let them use the map, and then after they've already tutored, of course, and on the draw step, we're going to hit the tower. And go get a swamp, just because double black looks more likely here than double green in the near future. And fortunately for us, they didn't show us another tower, at least yet. So they're on 4 lands and they've got nothing else to do, which means not Inquisitioning last turn was correct. They would have played something here, I imagine. But we draw Thoughtseize. So Thoughtseize we know is going to hit. And I think if the client could catch up with us here. We made it almost all the way through the league, my friends, without a client lag in the replays, but now we're lagging. Alright. Guess we're just going to next turn and seeing if that does it for us. Okay, let's slow down. And now somehow it skipped 2 turns. Okay, so anyway, we saw that the opponent found an Ugin, basically. So we knew about the Wormcoil, we knew about a Forest, we knew about an Ulamog. The opponent found Ugin. So we take the Wormcoil engine, right? That's the obvious play. They're just having to hardcast everything from here on out. The only way that's not the correct play is if they top deck the missing Tron land, and wouldn't you know it, they top decked the missing Tron land, they play Ugin, they wipe our board. Literally could not draw it up better if they tried. So we've kind of got no choice but to trophy away that Ugin, and sadly we've got some Inquisitions instead of some Thoughtseizes. So we can't take the Ulamog out of their hands, so that feels very, very bad. Why did I play out the Bob into a known Ulamog? Well, this is why. They're going to cast Ulamog this turn, and they're going to with its cast trigger, exile Bob and exile an Overgrown Tomb. That technically leaves us with a chance to win this game, because then we can Slam Lily, we can Edict the Ulamog, and then it's a top deck war. It's definitely not in our favor, but it's also definitely our best chance. If we sandbag the Bob, try not to lose it to Ulamog, they're just going to hit 2 lands. They're not going to not cast them, and then we need to draw an untapped land to have a chance. So I like playing the Bob here as bait for the Ulamog. Sorry to do it to you, Bobby, but it's our only shot. So the opponent goes Ulamog and plays out the forest as well. They have 2 unknowns in hand. Turns out we would have drawn the land anyway, but can't know that would have been the case. So we'll run out that land, we Edict, and then we hope the opponent's got no payoff. But look at all these lands getting tapped. Who is it? Who is it? Don't show me. I can't take it anymore. Is it the Walking Ballista? Well, they tap some stuff and then they stop tapping some stuff. It sure is. It's the Walking Ballista, and it's the Wormcoil Engine, so it's absolutely savage. We top deck a Tireless Tracker. We're just done. We're just done. We don't have any chance. And you know who should get the thumbnail treatment for this video is the freaking Walking Ballista, because this card dealt us all of our losses as the payoff. Absolutely unreal how often this came at, after the dust had settled and we were kind of both top decking, boom, they have the Walking Ballista and a ton of mana every time. So Walking Ballista, definitely a tough one for us, my friends. And the league was going so well, and then we ran into a brick wall called Tron. And you know, this green Tron matchup, like I just said a little while ago, it is beatable. I really don't mind seeing it. Our opponent, you know, they kept 7 both games, and again, we had them on, 4 or 5 lands, and we took the Wormcoil Engine. They had an 8-drop and a 10-drop and a forest in hand. Then they instantly top-decked the Urza's Tower. If they didn't do that, I think we're very favored to win that game. But, of course, Tron can do that. I'm not taking anything away from the deck. It does have, the ability to just blindly top-deck the thing, as well as some other ways to tutor for it. So it's not entirely unreasonable, but I think over the course of these 2 latter matchups in this league, Eldrazi Tron and then Green Tron, we pretty much got max punished at several different turns, not gonna lie. So don't let that color your perception of our deck, because I think the Green Tron matchup is totally fine. My personal win rate on my own deck against it is better than 50-50 for sure over the last several weeks, and there's nothing in Chris's deck here that makes it any worse. So sometimes they're just going to get you, and that's all there is to it. Again, we had a lot of bad luck here in some crucial spots. The fact that we hit double Inquisition that turn when we really needed the 4th land was absolutely brutal, because if we had been able to play the Goyf that turn, like field into Goyf that turn, we would have had Trophy, I think, held up, if I'm remembering correctly, for the turn that they would have been threatening to top deck the tower. And that would have made all the difference in the world. Or if we had just hit Thoughtseizes instead of Inquisitions off of this, that would have been really nice too. We just take away their payoffs, and then it's a more interesting game. Then we have Bob and Goyf sticking around, and who knows what happens. But so we had some pretty poor luck here against Tron and some pretty crucial turns, and then you saw what happened against Eldrazi Tron. Game 1, they just top-decked Thought Knot into Endbringer into Ballista when we had them on the ropes, and we had 5 bricks in a row. And then Game 2, we never hit our 3rd land until it was far too late. So definitely showed the power of the deck in the first 3 matches, and you can see how at least one of these other matches could have gone our way on another day, but it was not meant to be, and we come away with a respectable 3-2, dealt a couple losses at the hands of Urza's Tower. All right, my friends, so that was our league. Let's do a wrap-up. Let's do a review of the list. So the first thing I'll point out is Twilight Mire. Now, I had some criticisms of this land in the deck tech. Honestly, here it was fine. It was never a liability. In fact, it could have provided us double black for Fatal Push, at that crucial stage, the final turn of the Hogaak match. Not that we needed it, but if we had, Now, the one thing I will say with respect to this list, I still think my criticisms were valid, but it didn't turn out to be a liability here. But the sample size is small. I think the first time you open on a 2-lander with Field and Twilight Mire, you might want to rethink this, but that doesn't mean the land is unplayable. I think in order to justify that risk, however, we might want to build around the Twilight Mire a little bit more. Whether that be playing a second Treetop Village, maybe instead of Hissing Quagmire, to really take advantage of the power of Village and also allow the villages to filter their green mana into black for Twilight Mire might be nice. Or even just getting that third Scavenging Ooze into the 75 and really maximizing the value of Twilight Mire. I still think with the list as it is, there are not enough incentives to justify the risk of having a basically colorless producing opening hand, where Twilight Mire could have been even basic Swamp instead, to say nothing of Urborg or a 5th Fetch or whatever the alternatives are, right? So I think Twilight Mire, playable, looked fine here. If you want to keep playing it, maybe just build around it a tad more with one or two of those fringe decisions. Not a huge deal either way, but that would be my thoughts after the league on Twilight Mire and on Scavenging Ooze. Hey, we saw how good Skooz was against Goblins, against Hogaak. Even played a nice role in keeping us alive long enough for Hexdrinker to get over the line against the blue tempo deck. So third Skooz could be really, really nice. That said, Skooz is looking pretty poor against the Eldrazi decks and against the Tron decks. That did put us to the sword here, so what do we think about that? Well, Vraska Golgari Queen was nice where we saw her here, but she was one of those where we kind of moved away from her a decent amount of the time. She's a little clunky a decent amount of the time, and yet you just have to point out that Liliana of the Veil would shine a lot more against Eldrazi Tron and a lot more against Mono Green Tron, as well as a lot more against a lot of the format. Admittedly, not as good as she was before Hogaak came onto the scene, but Vraska's not good against Hogaak either. So that's just the thought there. I continue to believe Vraska's a really fine one-of. I continue to believe that it's fine to try her main deck if she's in your 75. But, you know, if we're looking at what beat us, well, the fourth Liliana could have been a difference maker in some of those matchups, at least in theory. Now, Kalidas, unfortunately, we didn't really get to see Kalidas at all. I guess so we'll just reiterate what I said at the beginning, you know. He's definitely more viable now than he was before Bridge from Below got banned, where he was just too slow to affect proceedings 90% of the time. However, if we are persisting with Kalidas, I would like to see maybe an Unearth Trimmed, because that's just a bit too much of a nombo for me. And if we're persisting with a 2 Unearth, conversely, maybe we can find a better slot than Kalidas here. So definitely a lot to think about. And what do we do? Because, you know, as much as I have my own preferences and as much as I think the list I've been playing is pretty good, I've been dropping games to Eldrazi Tron too. So let's take a look at something that might fit well in Chris's list, as well as my own, as well as yours out there. So some people have wondered about Infernal Reckoning. Really interesting card. Really nice kind of colorless hate that we almost never see. Sadly, I do not believe it to be good enough. It just, like, if Karn the Great Creator didn't exist, I would say, okay, Eldrazi Tron has a lot of work to do to get to the bigger payoffs, the bigger planeswalkers that Infernal Reckoning misses. And in the meantime, Infernal Reckoning is a really good answer to lots of the other stuff. But, you know, even that's not necessarily that true. You still have to 2-for-1 yourself to kill a Reality Smasher with this thing, and Thought Knot Seer can still catch you tapped out and take it away. It's not a perfect answer to anything, and then on top of that, Karn the Great Creator can just win the game anyway, right? So as much as it would be nice to say, okay, Eldrazi decks are in the meta, let's play Infernal Reckoning, I still don't think it quite does enough to justify the slot. Guys, we need stronger colorless hate. They get to have their cake and eat it too, with all the utility lands in the world and all the mana acceleration in the world, and there's still, you know, we've got Choke to punish you for playing Islands, we've got Blood Moon to punish you for playing an interactive deck that's not red, we've got all this other stuff, and there's not enough good colorless hate. Let's get a better card printed, please, than Infernal Reckoning to make the Eldrazi really cry. That would be nice. But in the meantime, what do we think about revisiting Liliana's Triumph that got a lot of hype when it came out, including from me, but doesn't really see much play anymore after the initial waves of testing? Well, I can tell you that it's better positioned now, in my view, than it has been in a while. Eldrazi Tron back on the menu. This is a really good one. You don't have to 2-for-1 yourself against Reality Smasher if you're edicting them instead of targeting the Smasher. And Bogles is also back on the rise. Bogles has seen a real spike from the real lull they had a little while ago. And of course, Triumph is a very fine, decent card against the likes of humans, against Jund, against the Rock Mirror, against a lot of decks. And it has that 2-for-1 potential. Don't neglect that. So maybe, just maybe, the time is right for us to bring back Liliana's Triumph. Try it as a one-of. Could honestly be main decked, but might be better in your side. Depends on the rest of your configuration. But based on the struggle that I faced on my own deck against Eldrazi and on Chris's deck here, Eldrazi continue to be a scourge, so they're sadly not going away. Maybe Liliana's Triumph is a nice role player, and with Plague Man absolutely hosing the go-wide strategies, Liliana's Triumph is not as bad there as you would otherwise think, because Plague Man can come down and kill the X-ones, and then Triumph can finish off whatever survived the Plague Engineer. In theory, if nothing else, it's better there in tandem with Plague Man than it used to be. So, food for thought. Otherwise, I do like the list, Chris. I would encourage you to continue testing your deviations for my list to review for the viewers. That's Twilight Mire, that's second Unearth, that's a main deck Vraska, perhaps competing with the fourth Liliana, and a Kalitas. I think each and every one of these in a vacuum is totally fine, totally reasonable, and well worth testing. All together, though, I don't know that I like how many little tiny non-bows there are with the deck as a whole. Again, I think if we're playing the Kalitas, maybe that's assigned to go down to 1 Unearth. If we're playing the Twilight Mire, maybe that's assigned to maybe try to change the mana base to a second Treetop, or to at minimum play a third Skooz. If we're playing the Vraska, that's fine, but can we afford to cut a Liliana against Tron and against Eldrazi Tron? I don't know. These are questions we all need to figure out for ourselves, but that is my feedback, my friend. I hope it's useful to you. I hope that this gameplay was entertaining for you, and I hope everyone out there enjoyed it. It was only a 3-2, but I'll tell you guys, I've been having a lot of 3-2s lately. I am very, very fine with it as a floor, and I think in a lot of cases I've been rather unlucky to finish it a 3-2 at the end of the day. But you know what? The meta is a little bit more hostile to us. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's a little bit more hostile to us than I was expecting in the wake of the bridge ban. Mainly because Jund is a brutal matchup now, whereas it used to be pretty 50-50. It's definitely worse than 50-50 now. So Jund is a tough one on top of everything else. And I think we're at the point where we need to maybe reinvestigate tech like Liliana's Triumph and maybe start just again leaning more heavily on our bombs like Plague Engineer. Maybe start main decking more Plague Men and seeing where that gets us. It's tough to find the slots though, but always got to be one step ahead with a deck like this, right? So I continue to think that we have all the tools to be great in the meta. We are still the best interactive deck against decks like Burn, where our Painless Mana is really, really nice. We do still have the edge of Field of Ruin plus discard, a really nice tandem against Tron, giving us a really decent game in that matchup. It doesn't always come together, but I think our position continues to be fine. We've just got to carve out the very best 75 we can. So thank you so much, Chris, for your generous support, for making this video possible, and for putting your list out there for all of us to review and for all of us to learn from. Please, everybody, as I said, feel free to contribute your thoughts on the list, and also to the sideboarding and the lines you saw here today. Thank you once again to Chris, thank you to Dan Moulton, our brand new Inquisitor, and thank you as always to all Patreon supporters and to all subscribers to the channel. The channel has been monetized, my friends, that feels great, so thanks to everybody who made that possible, and stay tuned because we're going to keep playing Rock. I think the month of August will be a little bit more sparse in terms of my availability, so we might see a downtick in actual gameplay, but we've done a whole lot of it lately. Hopefully that's enough to tide you over through a slightly leaner period. And I do have some more theory videos and some more non-gameplay related videos coming up as well. So we'll still get plenty of games in. Don't you worry about that. Thanks for watching this Chris Rock Donation League, and I look forward to hearing from you. Hope everyone out there has a wonderful day. I will talk to you soon.